Chapter 51. After everyone arrived at Guardhouse Island, Liber's airship also landed and stopped in front of them. All right. This is the fourth venue of the Hunter exam, Guardhouse Island. And I have the honor of continuing as the proctor for the fourth phase of the Hunter exam. Liber emerged from the cabin of the airship and announced this to the examinees gathered before him. After speaking, he raised his hand and snapped his fingers. A mechanical rolling sound echoed from behind him. Everyone turned to look and saw a female staff member pushing a cart toward them. On the cart sat a square box. Reo knew this was used for drawing lots. "I'd like to ask all candidates to come forward and draw a lot," Liber said with a smile. Gon and the others looked on with curiosity. "Draw lots? What's this for?" Gon asked. Liber smiled, clearly pleased with their reactions. "Actually, I've placed as many cards in this box as there are of you. Now, please come forward and draw a card in the order in which you escaped the trap tower." After Liber gave the signal, the staff girl beside him stepped forward and announced. "Then, Mr. HxH, please draw first." "How amusing. I didn't expect being first to come with special treatment," HxH said in his signature eerie tone. He strolled up, reached into the box, pulled out a card, glanced at it, and pocketed it silently. The remaining candidates silently hoped they wouldn't become the target of this deadly jester. After HxH, Jeteriker stepped up, wordlessly drew a card, and returned to his spot, his expression unreadable. Next, Mr. Hanzo. Hanzo, like the two before him, drew a card and quickly returned to his place. Judging by the grin on his face, his target probably didn't pose much of a threat. Fourth, Mr. Gon. The staff member called Gon's name. Gon stepped forward and drew a card. When he saw the number on it, his expression fell slightly. Reo watched him and immediately understood. Poor kid, he had drawn HxH's number. Fifth, Mr. Killua. Killua came forward, grabbed a card, and returned silently. 6. Mr. Reo. Hearing his name, Reo approached the box, curious about who his target might be. He casually reached into the box, drew a card, and looked at the number, 255. Wasn't that Tumpa? Reo instinctively scanned the line of examinees and spotted Tumpa standing behind Lena. He hadn't expected to be this lucky. He had wanted to deal with Tumpa for a while, and now the opportunity had practically dropped into his lap. Passing the fourth exam and settling a grudge, two birds with one stone. "Mr. Reo? It's time for the next candidate to draw." The staff girl's voice snapped Reo out of his thoughts. He realized he was blocking Kurapika from drawing his card. Given the relationship between him and Kurapika, the latter didn't say a word. Reo smiled apologetically at the staff member and stepped aside to wait. Then Kurapika came forward to draw his card. Half an hour later, Liber looked at the now empty box and continued explaining to the candidates. "Okay, everyone has drawn a card. Each of these cards has a number on it. That number corresponds to another candidate present here. In short, you are both the hunter and the hunted." The examinees tensed at Liber's words, and the atmosphere aboard the airship turned heavy. Gon asked what exactly that meant. Liber, clearly enjoying the tension he created, answered. "Simply put, the objective of the fourth exam is to acquire your target's number plate. The number on the card you drew identifies your target." This announcement intensified the already thick tension. Examinees began concealing their number plates and eyeing each other with suspicion, even those who had cooperated just the day before. Of course, not everyone bothered hiding their plates. HxH, Jeteriker, Reo, and Gon kept theirs openly displayed on their chests, unconcerned by other stares. Reo, in particular, left his plate visible in hopes of drawing out whoever had drawn his number, so he could deal with them quickly and then go greet Tumpa. The staff girl announced that all the drawn numbers had been recorded. Liber seemed pleased with their reactions, a grin played at the corners of his mouth. In addition, to pass the fourth exam, You must collect number plates totaling 6 points. Hanzo, who had just stashed his number plate, couldn't help but ask curiously. 6 points? What does that mean? Liber looked at Hanzo, then explained. In this phase, each plate has a point value. Your target's number plate is worth 3 points. Your own plate is also worth 3 points. So, if you manage to capture your target's plate and keep your own, you pass. Oh, and if you capture another candidate's plate by accident, you can still earn a point or two. It's not impossible to reach 6 points that way. He paused, then pointed toward Guardhouse Island. The exam venue is this small island. You'll remain on Guardhouse Island for 1 week. No matter how you go about it. Well, here's where Claire comes in. Apparently, the staff woman's name was Claire. Reo took note of this silently. Following Liber's cue, Claire stepped forward and addressed the group cheerfully. Now, I've got some good news for everyone here. All candidates participating in the 4th exam will automatically qualify to take the first test of next year's Hunter exam. So even if you don't pass this year, you can try again next year. But none of the candidates seemed to care. After all, everyone present hoped to pass now and become a licensed hunter. Nobody was planning to fail. Claire noticed the crowd's indifference and forced a smile, thinking to herself, these guys are seriously no fun. Next up, everyone has 20 minutes to prepare. Chapter 52. When everyone heard they had 20 minutes to prepare, they scattered immediately. While there had originally been many well-connected groups, they now disbanded, wary of sneak attacks. Reo, however, didn't share the same concerns. From the first phase of the exam, they had all worked together and come to understand each other's personalities. He didn't believe any of them would suddenly turn traitor. So, yo, what numbers did you guys get? I drew number 246, Leorio said brightly. Reo looked at Leorio, smiling openly in front of them, and couldn't help but feel that the guy's sincerity was both charming and slightly clueless. But since Rio's target wasn't in their group, he was the first to share his card. My target is number 255, Tunpa. Gon's eyes widened immediately. I remember he's had a lot of bad blood with you. So this time. Gon didn't finish, but everyone recalled Rio's explosive outburst back in the trap tower and felt a little sorry for Tunpa, who had made the poor decision to provoke Reo. Couldn't he have just enjoyed being alive? Why go and piss off Reo of all people? Kurapika quickly regained his composure. I drew number 191. Killua casually revealed his as well. I got number 199. That left only Gon, who hadn't shown his card yet. He hesitated for a moment, his hand hovering in place before finally lifting it slowly to reveal the number. Number 44? Leorio's eyes nearly popped out. No way. You really drew Hisoka's number? They had all been speculating about who the unlucky soul was that ended up with Hisoka's card, and now they knew. Gon. Kurapika and Killua were equally shocked. Of all the people to draw that card. After a long pause, Kurapika sighed and spoke gently. Gon, maybe it's best if you give up on hunting Hisoka. If you go after him, I'm afraid. Leorio nodded in agreement, concerned. Kurapika's right. You're not a match for Hisoka right now. But if you focus on the other 3 candidates, you could still pass. Killua, who had been silently observing, finally spoke up with a small smile. Are you happy? Or scared? Let's hear it. Gon went and sat at the bow of the boat, staring into the distance for a few seconds before answering. I don't know. In a duel, I definitely wouldn't stand a chance. But if it's just about taking a number plate, I think I might have a small chance. And just thinking about that. Even though I'm scared, I can't help but feel excited. Killua chuckled softly at Gon's response, clearly proud of him. So that's how it is. Then go for it, Gon. You better survive, okay? Leorio opened his mouth to protest Killua's encouragement, but Reo stopped him with a shake of his head. We've only known each other for a couple of weeks, but I think you already understand what kind of person Gon is. When he sets his mind on something, nobody can stop him. So just let him go. Who knows? He might surprise us. Leorio looked at Reo, then quietly stepped aside, accepting it. Reo, seeing that the conversation had wrapped up, turned to leave and get some rest. That's right. Reo, weren't you going to find Lena? Reo froze. Oh no. I forgot about Lena. In the original storyline, Lena was killed in seconds by Killua's brother. If he didn't go see her now, that could happen again. But... Reo turned back suspiciously. How did Gon know about Lena? Seeing his puzzled look, Gon blushed and grinned. The night before the innkeeper and his wife left, I went looking for you. I didn't expect you to be so bold. Rio's face flushed slightly. He had no idea what came over him that night, just pure impulse. As he recalled the moment, he rubbed his waist awkwardly. Lena had come to celebrate her success, and one thing led to another. What? Gon, you went to find Reo and discovered something? Don't leave us hanging. Killua's eyes lit up with curiosity. As someone who enjoyed martial arts flicks, he was well versed in certain themes. No way, seriously? This is supposed to be a serious hunter exam. I can't believe you did something like that. So unfair. Leorio jumped in with feigned outrage. If not for his last teasing line, they might have actually believed he was mad. Kurapika flushed red. Unbelievable. I didn't think you were that kind of person, Reo. I really misjudged you. Reo looked at his flustered friends and let out a bitter laugh. He hadn't expected everyone to find out so soon. But Reo wasn't the type to deny something after the fact. What was done, was done. Still, it was probably best to get out of there fast before they started grilling him. He dodged Leorio's mock attack and disappeared with a puff of smoke. Reo roamed the ship, searching for Lena. After a while, he spotted her near the railing. From where he stood, she was leaning against the fence, enjoying the sea breeze. A strand of her golden hair danced in the wind, and she gently tucked it behind her ear. The scene looked like something out of a dream. Reo didn't want to disturb it. He wished it could last forever. But beautiful moments always fade. Lena seemed to sense him and turned around. Well, took you long enough. I've been waiting forever. Here, this is for you. She pulled a card from her jacket pocket and handed it to him. Reo took it instinctively and glanced down. 406. He looked up at the smiling woman before him and understood instantly. He reached up and handed her the number plate pinned to his chest. Rio's gaze softened. It seemed the plot had shifted quietly. Originally, Lena's target was supposed to be Jeteriker. But this time, it was him. And honestly? That was fine. At least she wouldn't have to face Jeteriker anymore. What's with that look? You seem happy? Lena tilted her head, eyeing him curiously. Don't tell me you like being taken down. I think I've just discovered another one of your secrets. Reo shivered. He could feel the strange energy coming off of her. Seeing the way Lena looked at him, he suddenly felt a little scared. Chapter 53. The 20-minute preparation period passed quickly. A wooden plank was extended to Guardhouse Island, and the examinees would soon disembark using it. Just as Claire pulled out a timer to begin organizing the disembarkation, she was interrupted by Reo. Claire, if someone already has 6 points, do they still need to get off the ship? Claire blinked, momentarily confused by the question. Had he already taken out his target? Reo repeated himself with a calm voice. Let me ask again, if I've already gathered 6 points before disembarking, do I still have to go ashore? Claire finally processed what he was asking, but since it was an unprecedented situation, she wasn't sure how to respond. This has never happened before. I'll have to ask the examiner. She pulled out a phone and dialed. Examiner Liber? This is Claire. Yes, something unexpected has come up. One of the candidates has already reached 6 points during the preparation time. Okay, I understand. Claire hung up and turned to Reo. The examiner says that if you've gathered 6 points and haven't disembarked yet, you may remain on the ship. You're allowed to spend the next week aboard either the airship or the warship. Reo, satisfied with the answer, glanced at Lena. Hearing this news, she smiled and stepped forward, presenting 2 number plates to Claire. Claire cross-referenced the numbers with the record she had and confirmed their validity. Candidate number 80, Lena, successfully passed the 4th phase. Lena smiled at Reo and walked toward the interior of the warship to get some rest. After all, last night had been intense, and she was still a bit worn out. The other candidates stared in stunned silence. None of them had expected such a turn of events, that someone would hand over their number plate before disembarking, letting their partner rest on the ship while they continued the exam. That was next-level strategy. Definitely the move of a big-brain player. After Lena went inside, Claire looked around to confirm no one else was in the same situation, then resumed giving instructions. All right. We'll disembark in the same order as the escape from the trapped tower. Candidates will leave in 2-minute intervals. Please return to this location after 1 week, with the 6 points you've gathered. First up, Mr. HxH. HxH glanced at the others with a mischievous smile and stepped off the boat. Hey. His laugh sent shivers down everyone's spines. 2 minutes later, Jeteriker disembarked. Whether influenced by HxH or not, he also chuckled on his way out. Click click click. More goosebumps for the crowd. 2 minutes after that, it was Hanzo's turn. He cleared his throat like he was planning his own dramatic exit. But just as he stepped onto the wooden plank and opened his mouth, Reo kicked him off. Hanzo's exit became, "Yo-hoo, yo." Reo casually retracted his leg and turned to the group, looking unimpressed. What? You wanna get kicked off too? The examinees all shook their heads in sync. Nope. No, we're good. Only after seeing them calm down did Reo turn away. Next up was Gon. He disembarked quietly with a serious look, nodded to everyone, then ran straight toward the jungle. After Gon came Killua, who said nothing. He simply held his skateboard under his arm and slipped off the ship without a word. Finally, it was Rio's turn. He stretched a bit and waited by the plank for his 2-minute countdown. Once the time passed. All right, the next candidate may disembark. Reo lightly jumped down, landing with ease. He walked into the forest at a relaxed pace, wandering a bit to kill time, waiting to see if any other candidates would wander near so he could grab another plate. After a few minutes, he heard movement behind him. Glancing over his shoulder, he saw Kurapika approaching. Yo Kurapika. Didn't expect you to be the next one up, I thought it'd be Leorio. Kurapika was moving carefully through the foliage, on high alert. Though half the candidates before him were allies, that didn't mean he could lower his guard. When Reo suddenly called out, Kurapika instinctively dropped into a defensive stance. But once he recognized the voice, he relaxed with a deep breath. Geez, Reo, you scared me. He shot Reo an annoyed look. Why would he greet someone like that out here of all places? Reo raised his hands in apology. Sorry, I've been walking alone and was getting bored. Saw you and thought I'd say hi. Kurapika rolled his eyes but kept moving toward the deeper forest. Reo followed with an easy smile. Half a day later, Reo and Kurapika found a small stream. They caught a few fish, grilled them, and settled down for a simple meal. But since they were still in the hunter exam, it wasn't long before someone was drawn to the smoke from the fire. Reo noticed rustling in the tall grass nearby. Amateur, he thought. The grass is tall, but you're not even trying to hide properly? He casually picked up a rock and tossed it at the moving patch. Whack. Kurapika looked at Reo in confusion, not understanding what he was doing. Then a scream rang out. Only then did Kurapika realize what had just happened. TCH. Looks like my senses are getting dull after all this downtime, Kurapika muttered with a self-deprecating smile. Reo laughed. All right, Hunter Kurapika talking like a veteran already. Keep an eye on our fish. I'll go collect the guy's number plate. I haven't even got one yet. Reo teased, then jogged toward the fallen enemy while Kurapika shook his head in amusement. Even with all the growth Kurapika would undergo later, vows, restrictions, and all, Reo still respected how hard the guy worked to get there. Chapter 54. As soon as Reo finished speaking, he headed in the direction where the attacker had just fallen. After walking about 100 meters, Reo got a clear look at who had tried to sneak up on him. It was the same person who had messed with the water barrels back on Warship Island. Reo walked up to him, kicked his knife aside, and bent down to pick up the number plate. Number 105? Looks like this one was meant for me. Reo recalled that 105 wasn't one of the numbers Kurapika needed, so he pinned it to his chest and prepared to leave. But just as he stood up, swoosh! An arrow shot straight at him. Thwack! The sound of the arrow piercing flesh echoed in the trees. Damn! That was close. Reo casually dropped the unconscious body he had used as a shield. The poor guy had just been knocked out by a stone earlier. Reo had instinctively grabbed him in the split second before the arrow hit, using him as cover. Unfortunately, the arrow had gone straight through the man's chest, killing him instantly and staining Rio's hands with blood. Without hesitating, Reo sprinted toward the source of the arrow. They had only been about 20 meters apart, so Reo reached the attacker almost immediately. Bakukal? You had the nerve to try and sneak up on me? Reo recognized the face but showed no mercy. If someone dared attack him, they had to be ready to face the consequences. Reo turned his right hand into a knife hand and slashed at Bakukal. Bakukal, an archer by specialty, wasn't particularly skilled in close combat. He'd put all his faith in that surprise shot, but hadn't expected Reo to dodge and retaliate this fast. Panicked, Bakukal tried to shoot again, but Reo was already closing the distance. Left with no choice, Bakukal rolled backward, barely avoiding Rio's strike. To his credit, Bakukal had survived this far in the exam for a reason. While dodging, he pulled something from his clothes and threw it at Reo. Reo slashed at it instinctively, only to realize it was just a handful of weeds. He barely had time to react when Bakukal threw a small pouch of powder at him. But Reo had been in underground fights before. Tricks like this were nothing new. He raised his left arm to shield himself, leaving just enough space to see. Swoosh! Reo burst through the haze, his right hand striking out in a palm strike to Bakukal's back. Gah! Bakukal hit the ground hard, coughing up blood. Reo crouched down, pinned both of Bakukal's arms behind him, and pressed a knee into the back of his neck, making escape impossible. Reo, I was wrong. Spare me this once. That arrow, I smeared it with a light anesthetic, and I didn't aim for anything vital. I just wanted the 105 plate. Bakukal was panicking. He didn't know much about Rio's strength, but the few exchanges they'd had were more than enough to realize this wasn't someone to mess with. If it weren't for the allure of that 105 plate, Bakukal would never have considered targeting Reo. Oh? Not good enough. Try a better reason, or I might turn you into a live-action Bakugan today. Bakukal didn't know what a Bakugan was, but he had no intention of finding out. I know where most of the other candidates are. I planted miniature trackers on a bunch of them before we disembarked. Reo raised an eyebrow, intrigued. He'd noticed that Bakukal had a knack for gadgets back on the warship, but he didn't expect this level of stealth. You bugged other examinees? Spill it. Who, and how many? I might let you live if it's good enough. Leniency for honesty, punishment for lies. Bakukal saw hope and quickly confessed. Not too many, just a few. The three Amori brothers. Reo didn't react but listened closely. And I slipped one on Ponzu. Reo made a note of that. He remembered that Ponzu teamed up with Bakukal later on in the original story. Keep going. Bakukal nodded furiously. I hid one in Tunpa's backpack. Reo raised his eyebrows at that. Tunpa, the seasoned exam troll whose attempts were nearly as old as Reo and Bakukal's combined age, got bugged by this guy? Not bad. More. Bakukal continued. I put one on Somi's monkey too. Even the monkey's not safe, Reo thought, mildly impressed. Go on. Bakukal took a moment, then added, Bajral's collar. So even the quiet ones weren't safe. That guy looked decent, but clearly Bakukal wasn't picky. Keep going. By now, Reo had had his knee on Bakukal's neck so long the guy could barely breathe, but he managed one last name. And Takuro, the wrestler. Rio's eyes lit up. Takuro, the one who swore he'd come for me after the exam. Well, guess you've just made things easier, Bakukal. You're a sneaky one, huh? Didn't expect you to be this resourceful. You got a tracker on Tunpa, and he's my target. I want your radar. And I'll even pay for it. Your life is spared, and you get to keep the 105 plate. With that, you've got 6 points, right? You won't even need the radar anymore. Reo stood up and released Bakukal, tossing the 105 plate beside him. He didn't mind giving the guy a chance. Besides, Reo could afford to play fair, especially now that he was holding all the cards. Bakukal gasped for air, grateful to be breathing again. He trusted that Reo wouldn't go back on his word. Reo watched him calmly, unfazed by the situation he'd just caused. A few minutes passed before Bakukal could move again. But once he caught his breath, excitement overtook him. His target had been number 105. Now that he had it, he'd passed the 4th phase, and no longer needed the radar. Happily, he handed over the device to Reo, grabbed the number plate, and dashed off. His only remaining job now was protecting the number. Reo watched him disappear into the trees. No need to chase. He wasn't worth the energy. Hey hunters. Quick break again. Hopefully you're enjoying this fanfic. Let's keep going. Chapter 55. Reo sat next to Kurapika, locator in hand. Not only did he have the number plate he needed, but he even had Kurapika's target as well. He had to admit, Bakukal really was impressive. After eating their grilled fish, the two decided to go after Takuto first. They would take his number plate, then track down Badoro to complete Kurapika's points. Reo thought of how many times Takuto had provoked him. Now was the perfect opportunity to settle the score. It was the only way to cool the fire in his chest. Half a day later. The sky had darkened, streaked with hues of red as the day's heat finally began to fade. Following the signal from the locator, Reo and Kurapika arrived at a small hillside. Takuto was just about 100 meters away. Still, wary of potential traps, they moved slowly and carefully. Halfway through, they spotted him. Reo squinted. Takuto wasn't doing well. It was only the first day, but his clothes were already torn up. Still, he didn't appear to be injured. At the moment, Takuto was preparing dinner. Judging by the look of his grilled fish, though, Reo guessed it would take a miracle for it to be edible. The fish, still twitching slightly, looked barely cooked, likely just caught. Takuto took a bite. PFFT. Just as Reo predicted, the fish was inedible. Takuto immediately gagged and covered his mouth, looking completely defeated. PFFT, PFFT. Kurapika, crouched beside Reo, suddenly burst into laughter. He hadn't expected someone this clueless to make it this far in the hunter exam. Who's there? Show yourself. I can see you. Takuto stood up and yelled, clearly hearing the laughter, but unfortunately, he was facing the wrong direction entirely. Kurapika, briefly embarrassed that he had exposed them, lost all shame once he realized Takuto was shouting at thin air. How is this guy real? Reo didn't mind the exposure. In fact, he never planned on ambushing Takuto. Revenge wasn't satisfying unless it was done face to face. So Reo walked out into the open, making no effort to hide. Takuto spun around as he heard the approaching footsteps, now finally facing the right direction. Yo Takuto. Been looking for you. Didn't expect to walk in on such a culinary disaster. Reo smiled casually. Whether or not Takuto responded didn't matter, he wouldn't be walking away from this. HxH, figures it'd be you. Takuto clicked his tongue. Knowing full well the history between them, he didn't waste time with talk and lunged at Reo without warning. He tossed aside the half-eaten fish and charged, aiming to body slam Reo in a bear hug. Kurapika was startled by his sudden burst of speed and power. If that hits, he'll crush someone. But Reo stayed calm. With a light tap of his foot, he dodged the rush with ease. Takuto, frustrated, spun around and came at him again, determined to bring him down. Reo understood this guy's fighting style, pure wrestling. No punches, no kicks, just brute force. He kept evading, effortlessly sidestepping each attempt and mocking him as he went. Didn't you want to jump me back in the second phase? What a joke. You're pathetic. Come on, fatso, keep charging. I'll stand right here. Oh, I'm so tired you might get me next time. Takuto grew more furious with every taunt. His face turned bright red, and he lost all reason. Row. He stopped using technique altogether and charged blindly. Kurapika watched in awe. Reo dodged every attack with ease, and still had enough energy to keep teasing the guy. Having Reo as an ally is such a relief. Meanwhile, Reo decided it was time to end the fight. He stepped forward, stirring up a cloud of dust. In a flash, he appeared in front of Takuto and sent a powerful straight punch into his chest. Boom! The impact echoed. Takuto stumbled back 5 or 6 steps, clutching his chest in pain. Reo wasn't done. He dashed forward again, his foot smashing into the ground and cracking it beneath him. Dust rose. Reo burst forward like a bullet. In a blink, he was in front of Takuto again. Ra! Takuto swung his arms, trying to grab him. Reo scoffed and dodged to the left, then slapped him hard across both ears. Smack! Smack! Takuto, locked into his pose, couldn't dodge. He took the hit full on and dropped to the ground. HxH. That's it? What a waste of my time. Reo moved to finish it. He reached out to grab Takuto by the throat, but what happened next shocked him. Despite everything, Takuto still had a sliver of consciousness left. His wrestling instincts kicked in, and he slapped Reo squarely in the chest. Thud. Reo coughed up blood and staggered back. You piece of... Reo was furious now. He launched into a flurry of precise, brutal attacks. His palms struck lightning fast, leaving afterimages in the air. By way. Shenting. Temple. Airman. I Point. Rensong. Fengshi. Yingchang. Each name marked a vital acupoint. Reo hit them all in succession. Takuto's eyes bulged. His body twitched violently, then collapsed like a puppet with its strings cut. Blood began to seep into the dirt beneath him. As Takuto's body went still, the contractor's note appeared over Rio's right hand. His target's figure lit up, along with a string of ability data. Reo glanced at it. Another useless glutton-type ability. Seriously, this is the third one. What is it with these food-based powers? He deactivated the note, then leaned over Takuto's body to search for the number plate. To his surprise, Takuto had 2 plates, his own, and one other. 255 and 89. Lucky me. Reo pocketed both cards and walked back toward Kurapika. Kurapika hadn't lifted a finger the entire time. He trusted Reo would handle it, and he was right. Chapter 56. After defeating Takuto and unexpectedly gaining an extra number card, Reo only needed 2 more to meet the points requirement. With no urgency, he decided to rest and resume the hunt the next day. Kurapika agreed with Rio's idea. After all, it was their first night on Guardhouse Island, and most candidates were likely on high alert. So the two of them began preparing dinner. Though they were camped on a hillside, there was a small river nearby, making survival much easier. They divided tasks. Reo went to catch fish in the river, while Kurapika foraged for fruits nearby. Half an hour later, under the shade of a large tree, the two prepared grilled fish and fish soup. Reo handled the fish expertly. First, he descaled one, then inserted 2 small branches through its mouth, twisted them to remove the guts, and finally squeezed fruit juice over the meat for a light, fruity aroma. He repeated the process for the rest of the fish. 10 minutes later, the grilled fish was ready. Reo and Kurapika ate it while it was still hot, savoring every bite. Afterwards, they tossed the bones into the fire and drank fish soup from stone bowls they had made earlier. It was a simple but delicious meal, definitely better than whatever the other candidates were eating. After dinner, they took turns keeping watch. Reo guarded the first half of the night, Kurapika the second. The night passed without incident. Both of them managed to get some decent rest. At dawn, they reheated the leftover soup for breakfast. While eating, Kurapika brought up their next target. Reo, according to the locator, the nearest targets are the Amori brothers. If we take them out, you'll have enough number plates, and maybe even an extra. Reo shrugged. He only needed 2 more cards, so it didn't matter where they came from. And since the brothers were closest, they set out. Though it would take most of the day to reach them, the locator made things easy, so they took their time. By afternoon, they arrived at the Amori brothers' position. Damn. Of all people, it had to be you two. Our luck really sucks. The eldest of the Amori brothers spoke in a low voice, clearly aware of how strong Reo and Kurapika were. Be big bro, what do we do? Fight? The youngest looked nervous. Of course we fight, you idiot. The second brother smacked the youngest upside the head. Even knowing they were outmatched, the 3 brothers decided to go for it. Maybe something miraculous would happen. 5 minutes later, Reo stood over their defeated bodies and shook his head. You knew you couldn't win. Why bother? Don't act so smug, Kurapika muttered. These were the guys you suggested. Mama, I only needed their number plates. They could have just handed them over. Suddenly, a voice called out from above. Reo and Kurapika immediately went on guard, until they recognized who it was. Yo. It's you two. I was wondering who caused this mess. Killua stood atop a tree branch, grinning as he greeted them. Reo grinned back. He hadn't expected to run into Killua here, but given his tracking skills, it wasn't that surprising. Yo Killua. Been a while, but you haven't changed one bit. Killua jumped down and landed smoothly in front of them. I didn't think I'd find you two here. Number 199, right? That's my target, Kurapika recalled. Killua nodded. I've been tailing these guys for a whole day. I saw someone take them out and came to check. Didn't expect it to be you. Reo realized they had unknowingly messed up Killua's plan. But since the fight was already over, it didn't really matter who finished it. He reached down and picked up the number plate labeled 199, tossing it to Killua. Then he grabbed the remaining 2 for himself. With those, Reo had gathered all 6 points required to pass. Now it was just about finishing up Kurapika's total. Reo pulled out the positioning radar he'd taken from Bakukal and showed it to Killua. A little cat face icon appeared on the screen. Wo didn't think that guy had it in him. Planting trackers without anyone noticing? Pretty slick. Let's go hunt them down. Killua was on the same page as Reo, time to hunt. Reo and Kurapika had already been planning to do just that, and now with Killua joining in, the trip would be a lot less boring. According to the radar, the nearest signals belonged to Ponzu and Tunpa. Their signals overlapped, suggesting they were traveling together. "Alright, looks like Ponzu and Tunpa are closest," Killua said, studying the screen. "Let's move in before someone else gets them." Reo nodded. Kurapika still needed points, and those two could be a backup if nothing else. Though the sun was starting to set, they had enough daylight left to move quickly. No more chatting, they immediately set out toward their next targets. Swoosh, swish. The three of them ran swiftly through the forest, Reo leading the way to break the wind and clear a path for Killua and Kurapika behind him. Chapter 57. Half an hour later. Reo stopped and checked the positioning radar. They were now within a few hundred meters of their targets. Not wanting to startle them, Reo decided to halt first. Killua and Kurapika, who had been running just behind him, noticed Reo stop and quickly realized they were near Swami and Dongba. Curious, they moved in closer to glance at the radar in Rio's hand. Reo, sensing them behind him, held the radar out so they could see more clearly. He spoke in a low voice. "We're really close now. I think it's best if we split up and search. Swami himself isn't particularly strong, but those monkeys he raises are a pain. They could spot us before we even get close. If we split up, we reduce our chances of being detected." Both Killua and Kurapika nodded in agreement. It made sense. The three of them dispersed and began to encircle the area. Technically, any one of them could take out Swami and Dongba with ease, but where's the fun in that? They were playing hunters now, winning too easily would be boring. Reo crouched low and moved forward stealthily. A short distance ahead, he saw the grass shaking. 10 meters. 5 meters. 3. 1. Reo lunged forward, grabbing the hidden figure in the grass and covering his mouth before he could make a sound. MMFF. MMFF. The figure squirmed and mumbled, but Reo had already anticipated resistance. His grip was firm. He recognized the person immediately, it was Swami. Oddly, his monkey wasn't around. Probably scurrying elsewhere. Reo delivered a precise chop to knock Swami out, then tied him up with the rope he had on hand. Just as he finished securing Swami, footsteps approached. Reo turned to see Kurapika dragging a captured Dongba over. And then, from above. Boom. Killua leapt down from a tree, holding Swami's monkey by the tail, grinning. And just like that, their first coordinated hunter operation was over. It had been so easy, it almost felt dull. Plop. Reo tossed Swami and Dongba side by side, then glanced down at the number plates in his hand. There were 4 in total, and one of them was 403. Reo blinked. Wait. They stole Leorio's number plate? Killua burst out laughing. PFFT, Leorio, seriously? He let these two take his plate? We have to tease him when we see him. Even Kurapika sighed and rubbed his forehead. Unbelievable. What Reo didn't realize was that Leorio had blamed himself for losing the number plate. He'd thought that if Kurapika hadn't gone with Reo, he might have managed to get it back. But when no one helped him at the critical moment, Dongba and Swami snatched it away. Now Leorio was probably miserable. Kurapika suggested that if they ran into him, they should return the number plate and help him clear the 4th phase. Still, it was already late. Reo decided they'd wait until morning to find him. After all, the locator had his position saved. When Reo shared the plan with Killua and Kurapika, they had no objections. It was too dark to go hunting now anyway. The three of them found a safe place to rest and camped out for the night. Morning. After sunrise, the trio set off toward Leorio's location. Since his number plate had been stolen, he hadn't moved far. Less than an hour later, they found him under a tree, grilling fish over a small fire. Killua and Kurapika were about to approach him when Reo held out a hand to stop them, a mischievous grin creeping across his face. Reo gestured for them to stay hidden, then climbed up into the trees and silently made his way above Leorio. About 10 seconds later, Killua saw Reo crouched in a branch directly above Leorio's fire. With a sly smile, Reo took out a small hook and dropped it down, carefully trying to snag the grilled fish. Just as the hook hovered above the fish, Reo tossed a pebble into a patch of grass nearby. Rustle. Leorio turned toward the sound, distracted. Reo used the opportunity to hook the grilled fish and pull it up, leaving nothing but the flames. When Leorio turned back, his expression froze. Huh? He blinked at the empty fire, completely baffled. Where's my fish? It was right here. He poked the fire with a stick, hoping to find it buried beneath the coals. Nothing. Ah. My grilled fish. What happened? It was huge. Leorio shouted in disbelief. Then he looked up, and spotted Reo in the tree, already munching away. You bastard. You stole it. I worked half a day for that. Reo grinned. Relax, I didn't eat it for free. Here, call it a trade for dinner. He tossed something down from the tree. Swoosh. Leorio caught it midair. Snap. He looked down. Wait. This is my number plate. Leorio's eyes widened, and emotion welled up. He hadn't expected to get it back. Reo. Thanks, man. Seriously. I'll go catch 2 more fish right now. Reo dropped from the tree and waved at Killua before answering. No worries. I got it from Dongba and figured I'd bring it back to you. I've already got 6 points, so I didn't need it. Leorio was stunned. Wait, what? You already finished collecting all 6? But it's only the 3rd day. Reo just smirked and casually pulled out 4 number cards from his pocket. Killua and Kurapika stepped out and waved their own number plates at him. You guys. You all got them already? How? Leorio looked completely defeated. The 3 looked at each other and laughed. Yeah, compared to the others, they'd wrapped things up fast. Reo then pulled out the locator he'd taken from Bakukal and showed it to Leorio. Hey, what's this? It's flashing. Leorio stared at the blinking point labeled with the kanji for thunder, utterly confused. Reo gave him a long, dumbfounded look. Hey! Don't look at me like that, I'm trying here. Kurapika cleared his throat. That's a tracker. The flashing one? That's you. That's how we found you. Leorio's face dropped. Wait, you tracked me? When did that happen? Reo chuckled. Once again, he had to admire Bakukal's stealth skills. No wonder the guy made it so far in the original timeline. Now, with everyone else nearly finished, Leorio was the only one among them without a complete score. Their next goal? Help him get the number plate he needed. Conveniently, Leorio's target, Ponzu, was still active and appeared on the radar. Perfect. Chapter 58. That night, the group split up to search for Ponzu. Not long into his search, Reo stopped in front of a cave that felt oddly familiar. Oh. So it's this cave. No wonder it looked familiar. He remembered this from the original timeline. Not only was Ponzu trapped inside, but anyone who entered ended up stuck as well. After the snake charmer died, his snakes went wild, and the cave became a one-way trap. Once inside, escape was nearly impossible. But Reo figured he might be able to change that outcome. He cautiously approached the cave's entrance, watching for movement. Now. Reo lunged and grabbed a slithering snake. With one swift chop, he severed its head. The contractor's note appeared in his hand, automatically flipping to the 7th page. The snake's image manifested, and 2 streams of information flowed into Rio's mind. Interesting. The first ability, heightened perception, sensing the environment through particles in the air. The second, snake breath, the ability to simulate a snake's aura and scent. Reo chose the second ability without hesitation. What he needed now was safe passage in and out of the cave. If he could imitate a snake's presence, the others might not attack him. Immediately, his breath cooled. His body temperature dropped, too. But instead of discomfort, he felt more at ease, his movements more fluid, his awareness sharper. Reo could feel the transformation, and it felt right. With confidence, he stepped into the cave. Rounding a corner, he walked deeper inside. After a few steps, he saw Ponzu, and the corpse of the snake charmer. It was the third day since they had arrived on Guardhouse Island. Judging by Ponzu's cracked lips, she had been here a while. There was food, but likely no water source. She looked dehydrated. When Reo appeared, Ponzu noticed him. At first, she lit up, relieved to see someone. But her expression quickly dimmed. Another person entering meant they'd be trapped too. Just like her. So she didn't move. She just slumped against the cave wall, utterly defeated. "Hey Ponzu, if you want to continue the hunter exam, I might be your ticket out." She glanced at him listlessly and looked away. Reo kept talking. "I can mimic snake scent. That's why I was able to walk in unharmed. If your target is Scar Pang, give me your number plate, I'll retrieve his for you. It's a fair trade. If you get out, you can keep going." He didn't wait for her reply. Reo walked over to Scar Pang's body and began rummaging through his belongings. The snakes that normally would have attacked remained still. He truly had fooled them. "Ah, found it. Wait, no, 362. 103. There it is." Reo retrieved Scar Pang's number plate and turned to see Ponzu staring at him in disbelief. "Told you," he said with a grin. "You didn't believe me, huh?" He walked up and handed her the plate. Ponzu blinked. Her expression softened. There was hope in her eyes now. She handed her own number plate to Reo. "I didn't think you'd really be able to get it so easily. Here, take mine." Under normal circumstances, Ponzu would have never surrendered her plate. She had both brains and strength, it was how she made it this far. But right now, Reo was her only way out. And besides, 103 was her target. The trade wasn't a loss. She tried to stand and take Rio's hand, but after sitting for so long, her legs had gone numb. She didn't notice until it was too late, and she collapsed forward. Reo caught her instinctively. As she steadied herself, she blushed slightly and whispered a quiet, "Thank you." Just then, a buzzing sound broke the moment. Buzz buzz. Reo looked up and saw a pink bee fly out from beneath Ponzu's hat. Sting. He winced and slapped at the bee as it stung him. Ponzu's eyes widened. "No, wait. Don't kill it." But it was too late. The pink bee was already a smear on Rio's palm. "That was the antidote," she finished in a whisper. Reo blinked at the mess in his hand. Antidote? Suddenly, he felt it, an unfamiliar warmth spreading through his body. His heartbeat picked up. A strange heat pulsed beneath his skin. What kind of poison is this? Something feels off. He looked at Ponzu, but her expression was changing too. Her cheeks flushed, and her eyes glazed over with a dazed look. Reo sniffed the crushed remnants of the bee and frowned. His blood felt like it was boiling. No. This isn't a normal poison. This is something else entirely. His vision blurred. His thoughts clouded. The scent of heather flowers filled the cave, and the heat of summer pressed in around them. Everything else faded. Chapter 59. Reo didn't know how many days had passed by the time he finally regained consciousness. With a pounding headache, he rubbed his temples and tried to gather his thoughts. It took him a while, but he slowly pieced everything together. The pink bee from earlier must have been Ponzu's secret weapon. Unfortunately, it had been accidentally triggered by her own scream, which made it mistake Reo for a threat and sting him. Reo hadn't expected to be taken out like that, and silently cursed himself for letting his guard down. Still, what was done was done. There was no point sulking over it now. Once he'd assessed the situation, Reo stood to find some food. He didn't know how long he'd been out, but the hunger hit him like a wave. Ugh. He reached out to move Ponzu, who was still sleeping soundly beside him. She didn't stir in the slightest. Reo stretched and tested his body. Surprisingly, he felt refreshed, clear-headed and full of energy. Likely thanks to one of the abilities he'd acquired recently. Without it, being unconscious this long could have been dangerous. At first, he planned to carry Ponzu out of the cave, but after seeing the state of her clothes and hair, he decided against it. Instead, he made use of what the cave offered, snake meat. He started a fire and grilled a few snakes for food. Half an hour later, the savory scent of roasted meat filled the cave, pushing away the lingering fragrance of heather. Ponzu began to stir. The moment she opened her eyes, the first thing she saw was Rio's face, up close. "Why you bastard!" She sat up and yelled, clearly furious. Reo didn't react. He expected it. After all, things had escalated a bit beyond their control. She wanted to keep yelling but, for some reason, stopped, and started crying instead. Reo tried to ignore her, but the crying was loud and annoying. He finally snapped. "All right already. It's over and done with. Let's focus on what comes next. We're still in the middle of the fourth phase of the Hunter exam." Ponzu quieted down after hearing that and started thinking more clearly. Reo turned back to the fire and continued grilling the snake meat. In truth, most of what happened could be traced back to Ponzu's pink bee. If not for that sting, none of it would have happened. Seeing that she'd calmed down, Reo pulled out a few bottles of water from his storage space and tossed them over. "Clean up." After a while, Ponzu returned. Her hair was wet, and she had changed into fresh clothes. Without hesitation, she walked over, grabbed a chunk of roasted snake, and started eating. She even kicked Reo lightly while chewing, as if the meat were his stand-in. Reo didn't react, he just picked up another piece and ate casually. "Not sure how many days we've been down here, but according to my radar, Leorio and the others aren't far. If they keep moving, they'll probably find this place in an hour or two." Ponzu froze mid-bite. "Wait, radar? You found me using a tracker? So you planned all of this?" she shouted. Her voice echoed through the cave. Reo winced and covered his ears. "Calm down. It wasn't me. That locator was placed on you by Bakukul. Blame him, not me." Ponzu fell silent. She and Bakukul had gotten along decently on Warship Island. She hadn't expected him to betray her like that, and it was clearly hard to process. How could he do that? Reo glanced over at her. He hadn't expected Bakukul to plant a tracker either. But in the end, Reo was the one who benefited from it. After a long pause, Ponzu finally spoke. 3 days. Reo raised an eyebrow. 3 days until the Hunter exam ends. Ponzu blushed slightly and corrected him. No. The poison from the bee lasts for 2 days. During that time, the victim stays in a state of sexual excitement. They only return to normal on the 3rd day. Reo went quiet. So for the last 2 days, they had been. He said nothing, just stared into the fire. Eventually, they finished the grilled meat. Reo stood and stretched. "How many points do you have now, counting your own plate?" Ponzu glared at him, assuming he was trying to take her number plate. "I have 3, mine, Scar Peng's, and 1 from someone else. That's 7 points total." Reo nodded. "Alright. Give me the number plate that isn't your target. That way you'll still have 6 points and pass the exam." Ponzu blinked. She hadn't expected that kind of offer. But she didn't hesitate, she took the extra plate from her bag and handed it to him. Reo returned her original number plate, number 246. Now he had 8 points, and with those extra 2, he could help Leorio by giving him 1 and tracking down another. Since it was already the 6th day of the exam, Reo decided it was time to regroup. I'm going to find Leorio and the others. You should come with me. If you don't, you might not get another chance. He looked at Ponzu seriously. She didn't say anything, just nodded. That was enough. Without waiting, Reo stepped forward and picked her up. Hey! Put me down. She struggled, but Reo ignored it and carried her out. 1 minute later. The two of them stood outside the cave, sunlight warming their skin and fresh air filling their lungs for the first time in days. And with that, Reo was back in the game. Chapter 60. When the two came back to their senses, Ponzu didn't say a word to Reo. She simply walked away, limping slightly, as if nothing had happened. Reo watched silently as her figure disappeared from view, then turned and headed in the direction of Leorio and the others. About half an hour later, following the positioning radar, Reo arrived at a small river. There, he saw 4 familiar faces eating together, Killua, Kurapika, Leorio, and now gone, who seemed to have joined while Reo and Ponzu were still in the cave. Without hesitation, Reo approached the group. Ah! Reo, we were so worried about you. Gon perked up the moment he saw Reo and shouted in relief. Yo, I'm back. Brought 2 number plates with me, too, Reo replied with a grin. Leorio, who had been sitting nearby, immediately lit up with excitement. Really? You're serious? That's amazing, I can finally pass the 4th phase. Leorio let out a joyful roar once Reo confirmed it, his relief clear as day. Kurapika and Killua also welcomed Reo back warmly. After a bit of conversation, Reo learned that the group had already planned to camp here for dinner before heading back to the starting point. They were hoping they might pick up 2 more number plates along the way. At that point, Leorio had only his own and 1 non-target plate, just 4 points in total. He needed 2 more to pass. Thanks to Reo, that problem was solved. No wonder Leorio was so ecstatic. With everyone now holding enough points, the pressure was off. They could rest and recover before making their way back. Alright, let's celebrate a full team pass. Reo took charge and assigned tasks. Leorio, go gather some firewood. Gon, try to catch some fish, big ones, preferably. Kurapika, find some fruit, something sweet and sour. Killua, I'll need you to catch a small animal or 2. I'll handle the cooking. Everyone nodded. They knew Rio's cooking was far better than theirs, so they followed his lead. 1 hour later. Everyone lay on the ground with full bellies, finally able to relax. After so much tension during the 4th phase, the relief was overwhelming. They knew they had passed, and that alone was worth celebrating. Of course, they weren't completely careless. With people like Hisoka still out there, they remained on guard. The next day, the group packed up their things and began their return to the starting point. They took their time, but stayed vigilant. Even though the test was nearly over, nothing was final until it was officially declared. An hour later, as they neared the starting area, Gon climbed a tree to scout ahead. Hey! I can see the warship. We're here. Everyone climbed up and peeked through the trees. Though the exam was basically over, they decided to wait until the official announcement before showing themselves. They weren't the only ones with that idea. Many candidates were hidden nearby. After some time, a sound broke the silence. Reo looked up and saw a Hunter Association airship flying overhead. From it, Claire's voice rang out. Dear candidates, the 4th phase of the Hunter exam is now officially over. Please return to the starting point with your number plates as quickly as possible. Anyone who fails to arrive within 1 hour will be disqualified. Important. Once back at the starting point, any further changes to number plates are invalid. Anyone caught violating this rule will be disqualified on the spot. Please take this seriously. With that, Reo and the others jumped from the trees. So did the other candidates who had passed, emerging from their hiding places and heading toward the ship. Not everyone was celebrating, though. Candidates like Swami and Tunpa, who had lost their number plates to Reo's team, could only watch in despair. This was my 34th try. I'm sick of being a rookie killer. Damn it. I was so close this time. If there was even a sliver of hope left, I'd keep fighting. Tunpa, devastated, looked at Reo and the others as they walked away. Guess this is where my hunter journey ends, he muttered. When Reo and the others arrived at the landing area, they saw Lena lounging on a beach chair, sipping juice under a sun umbrella like she was on vacation. She noticed Reo staring and waved casually. Reo twitched a little. That's my woman, all right. Spoiled to the bone. Hey. Reo, stop daydreaming, it's your turn to check in. Leorio's voice snapped him back to reality. Claire was collecting and verifying number plates. Reo stepped forward and handed over his 4. After confirming the 6-point total, Claire nodded and allowed him onto the airship. Not long after, the hour-long buffer ended. Claire then announced the qualified candidates for transparency. 6 points, Hisoka, Jitarakar, Reo, Kurapika, Gon, Leorio, Killua, Bakukul, Ponzu, Hanzo, Lena. Those who didn't make it could only watch as the airship took off for the final test venue. They would be sent home by the Hunter Association. Soon after boarding, the committee summoned everyone to the candidate lounge. Once there, Reo scanned the room. The list of qualifiers hadn't changed much from the original timeline, except Badora was missing, and now Ponzu, Lena, and Reo himself were added. After a few minutes, Chairman Netero arrived with the examiners. He looked around at the group and gave a satisfied nod. Well done, everyone. The 11 of you have passed numerous trials. 9 out of 11 are first-timers. Not bad at all, a true bumper crop this year. He chuckled as he spoke. Leorio couldn't help but laugh and leaned over to Kurapika. Hear that? He called us promising young talents. Kurapika glanced at him dryly. Don't get ahead of yourself. We're not done yet. Reo noticed Menki among the examiners and remembered her promise to him about becoming a gourmet hunter. Just as Reo was pondering how to follow up on that, Hanzo crossed his arms and said confidently, no need to stress. Anyone who makes it this far is practically guaranteed to pass. Only one test left. Once that's done, we'll officially become hunters. Right, Chairman? Netero turned to him with a squint and smiled. You ninja types sure talk a lot. Then his tone shifted slightly more serious. The final test will be held in 3 days. It will take place at a hotel rented by the Hunter Association. Rest up until then. With that, he turned to leave. Wait. What's the final test? Leorio called after him. Without stopping, Netero chuckled over his shoulder. That's a secret. You'll just have to wait and see. What? Leorio shouted. Everyone else looked around, half amused, half nervous. The end was in sight, but the final hurdle had yet to be revealed. Chapter 61. After Chairman Netero finished delivering his announcement, he left the room with the group of examiners. No one really knew what the purpose of their visit had been. But with their departure, the candidates' lounge finally quieted down. Reo and the others casually found spots on the floor and sat down to rest. Seeing this, Hanzo and Lena came over to join them and started discussing what the final test in 3 days might be. There were 11 people remaining. Aside from Hisoka and Jitarakar, everyone else was gathered here, but the lounge still didn't feel crowded. I was expecting to be packed like sardines on the airship, Leorio commented, glancing around. But with so few of us left, this place feels way too spacious. Reo nodded in agreement. Leorio continued, a bit more seriously. Still, I'm kind of nervous. From the tone of that old man Netero. Whatever the last test is, it's not going to be easy. The others nodded. They were all thinking the same thing. Kurapika, however, remained calm. There's no point worrying. We can't guess what the test will be anyway. Leorio scowled. Wow, you're really killing the mood. Can't you see everyone's anxious? Don't be such a buzzkill. Kurapika glanced around and realized everyone was staring at him. Ah. Is that so? Hanzo chimed in seriously. I have a feeling it's going to be something unusual. Leorio clapped him on the shoulder. Exactly. That's why we need insight from someone who's been through this. Suddenly, Leorio turned and locked eyes on Bakukal. Everyone followed suit. Bakukal raised his hands defensively. Don't look at me. I was eliminated during the 4th phase 3 years ago. This is my first time getting to the final. The group sighed in disappointment. Reo, growing tired of the speculation, decided to handle something else he'd been putting off. He stood up and told the group. I've got something to take care of. Be back later. Without waiting for a response, he left the lounge. Though Kurapika and the others were curious, none of them questioned it. Reo had always been a bit of a mystery. Reo headed toward the same room he'd discovered earlier, the one that had once led Leorio and Kurapika to mistakenly think he was a voyeur. Meanwhile, the rest of the group began to settle in for some rest. Kurapika and Leorio found a quiet corner. Gon stepped outside, deep in thought, with Killua silently following. Lena sat nearby, maintaining her weapons with intense focus, clearly feeling the pressure of the final test. Just beside her, Hisako was building a house of cards with a deck of poker, seemingly indifferent to the looming trial. When Reo arrived at Menki's room, he knocked several times, but there was no answer. Curious, he tried the handle. Click. The door opened easily. Menki? Hello? Anyone here? He stepped inside, looking around. When there was no response, Reo scratched his cheek awkwardly, turned to leave, and spotted a black garment draped over the sofa. Curious, he reached out and picked it up. Wow. I knew Menki was a little wild, but I didn't expect this kind of taste. He muttered under his breath as he gently placed the clothing back where he found it, then quietly exited the room. Unbeknownst to Reo, Menki and the other examiners were elsewhere on the ship, gathered in a separate room for an afternoon meeting. The long table in front of them was covered in empty plates, desserts, and snacks. Sachi munched on a cookie while reviewing candidate photos, offering commentary. This year's group is surprisingly strong. I didn't expect so many to make it to the final test. Menki picked up Leorio's photo with her chopsticks and frowned. The most surprising one is this guy. I was sure he'd get eliminated early. Burra, still chewing on jelly, raised an eyebrow. Still mad he peeked at you while bathing? Of course. Menki growled, a comic anger mark popping on her forehead. Even if he passes the hunter exam, I'm taking him down myself. Lebo, seated beside Sachi, dabbed his mouth with a napkin and pointed at Rio's photo. I'm more intrigued by this candidate. His decisiveness during the prisoner phase earned my respect. The examiner with the bean-shaped face, sitting between Menki and Sachi, asked. Because he didn't hesitate with death row inmates. Lebo nodded. That, and his ability to think outside the box. Like when he bypassed the main tunnel and found an alternate path. That kind of resourcefulness is rare. The group murmured in agreement. Menki then picked up Rio's photo and added her thoughts. I didn't notice him at first. But in the second phase, during the cooking trial, his actions stood out. The challenge was to make nigiri sushi. Most candidates went off to catch fish. But he stayed at the prep station. His partners, candidates 405 and 99, prepared the cooking water from scratch. Their sushi tasted better because of it. That showed a high level of culinary knowledge and hands-on skill. If Reo could hear Menki now, he might seriously consider becoming a gourmet hunter. Burra, meanwhile, held up two more photos, Lina and Ponzu. Interesting that two female candidates made it to the final. That hasn't happened in a while. And honestly, they're as strong as that Leorio guy you were just bad-mouthing. This year's test really is strange. The strong are really strong, and the weak. Well. President Netero, who had been silently listening the entire time, finally spoke. Indeed. It's rare to see this level of talent. But once every decade or so, the Hunter Association sees a surge like this. He chuckled softly, stroking his beard. Sachi turned toward him. That reminds me. Chairman, what's the final test going to be? Minky perked up, turning to Netero with curiosity. Yes, I'd like to know too. What exactly is the last phase? Burra chimed in as well. Even though the rookies are strong this year, the content of the final trial will determine how many pass. Netero wasn't in a rush to answer. He slowly skewered a piece of melon with a tiny fork, took a bite, and smiled. Well. The final exam needs careful planning. Minky looked toward the bean-faced examiner. Planning? What kind of preparation is he talking about? The man shrugged with a helpless expression. I have no idea. Even I can't predict what the chairman's up to. Netero just laughed quietly as he continued eating his melon, his smile as unreadable as ever. Chapter 62. Since Badoro wasn't among the final examinees this time, there was no awkward misunderstanding about anyone going to the library to study. Instead, everyone returned to the rooms prepared for them by the Hunter Association to rest. Reo hadn't found Menki earlier, so he'd returned to his room to relax, but before he could even sit down, he was intercepted by Lina, who dragged him off to her room for an impromptu training session. After several hours, the two finally stopped, cleaned up, and fell asleep together. The next morning, just as Reo and Lina had finished washing up, a loudspeaker blared across the airship. Beep, beep, testing, testing, cough. Attention, candidates. Please proceed to the interview room one by one for individual interviews. Lina, who was eating noodles at Rio's table, looked up and blinked in confusion. Final exam? Already? No, wasn't it supposed to be in 3 days? What's this interview about? Reo calmly continued eating. Don't worry. It's not the final test, just some pre-exam interviews. Chairman Netero probably wants to assess us a bit before things get serious. Relax. We'll go when it's our turn. Lina nodded and kept slurping her noodles. Meanwhile, Claire's voice continued over the loudspeaker. Candidate number 44, Mr. Hisaka, please proceed to the interview room. Hisaka, who had been idly building a card tower in his room, smirked. He flicked the tower over with a single finger, stood up, and headed toward the interview room. Hooah! His laughter echoed faintly as he vanished into the corridor. Nearly an hour later. Candidate number 80, Ms. Lina, please proceed to the interview room. Lina wiped her mouth, got up, and splashed some water on her face before heading out. 5 minutes later, she stepped into the interview room, where Chairman Netero was waiting with a warm but curious expression. Please, take a seat, he said with a nod. Lina knelt across from him. Let's begin. First question, why do you want to become a hunter? Lina frowned slightly, caught off guard by the simplicity of the question, but she answered honestly. I want to become a bounty hunter. Catch criminals, collect rewards. Simple as that. Netero nodded thoughtfully, then spread out 11 candidate photos in front of her, including her own. Among these, who do you pay the most attention to? Lina glanced over the photos. Without hesitation, she pointed to Reo first, then to Ponzu. Him. And her. Reasons? He saved my life during the first trial. I guess I developed a soft spot. As for her, I'm curious. She's another woman who's made it this far. That alone makes her stand out. Netero looked up from the photos, a flicker of surprise in his expression. Last question, Who's the last person you would want to fight? Lena thought for a moment, then pointed to HxH's photo. Him? There's something off about him. If I fought him, I think I'd die. My gut just screams danger. She hesitated, then added, second worst would be Jataraker. Just looking at him gives me a headache. Netero studied her for a moment, then gave a faint chuckle. All right. You may go. Lena stood, gave a respectful nod, and quietly closed the door behind her as she left. Meanwhile, Reo was lounging in the bathtub, staring at the ceiling and thinking about his next steps. The hunter exam was nearly over, but what came next? When he first arrived in this world, it had been after a car accident, waking up disoriented in the forests near Whale Island. Maybe it was time to return there. Something about that place still felt unfinished. Candidate number 405, Mr. Gon, please proceed to the interview room. The horn pulled Reo from his thoughts. If Gon had just been called, that meant Reo would be next. With a sigh, he stepped out of the tub, dried off with a towel, and headed to his bedroom to dress in the clean clothes provided by the Hunter Association. But before he could finish getting dressed, the door suddenly opened from the outside. Startled, Reo looked up, only to see Ponzu standing in the doorway, frozen in shock. From her perspective, it was quite the scene. Reo stood there shirtless, his hair slightly damp, the light casting shadows across his defined frame. His gaze was calm, and the faint smirk on his lips carried a wild, untamed edge. Ponzu's eyes widened. She stood there, stunned, a flush rising rapidly to her cheeks. Her mind drifted, inevitably, back to the 2 days they'd spent trapped together in the cave. To Reo, her reaction was amusing. After everything, she still blushed like a maiden. He couldn't help but tease her. What's wrong? Miss me already? Ponzu snapped out of her trance, face even redder now. Humph. I came to remind you your interview's next. You're taking too long. And now you say that? Still smirking, Reo casually stepped closer, reaching out to lightly tap her forehead. Also you do care. That's sweet. Ponzu sputtered, more flustered than before. Ugh, you're the worst, she shouted, turning on her heel and fleeing the room in a puff of steam. Reo chuckled, tossed on his shirt, and headed for the interview room, grinning all the way. Chapter 63. After finishing his interview, Reo casually shut the door behind him and made his way back to the lounge. He was the last to be interviewed, which likely meant the matchups for the final exam would be announced soon, possibly even that evening. He couldn't help but be a little curious about who he would be paired with, but for now, there was nothing he could do but wait for the results in 2 days. Elsewhere. Having completed the interviews, Chairman Netero was already busy working behind the scenes. Based on the candidates' answers and performances so far, he had his own ideas forming. Picking up a brush, he began writing on a large whiteboard. Menki and Sachi entered the conference room just in time to see him at work. President, what are you writing? Menki asked with curiosity. Netero turned to her with a mischievous smile. Just sorting out the groupings for the final phase of the exam. Curious? Grouping? Sachi echoed, stepping closer. You mean one-on-one elimination battles? Netero's eyes twinkled. Exactly right. Come have a look. He turned the board around, revealing a detailed bracket. Sachi and Menki's eyes widened in surprise. President, are you serious about this? Menki asked in disbelief. Oh, absolutely, Netero chuckled, stroking his beard. Burra, who had been quiet until now, sighed as he took in Netero's expression. Oh. Judging by that face. He's really serious about it. The other examiners exchanged uncertain looks, all clearly sharing the same thought, this was going to be a wild final. The bean-faced man, however, merely gave Netero a knowing look. Of everyone in the room, he probably understood the chairman best. From the look on Netero's face, he could tell this wasn't just a trial, it was a game. and Netero loved games. Meanwhile, Reo had spent the last couple of days relaxing in his room with Lena. Having not seen Reo for several days, she was unusually clingy and energetic, refusing to let him out of her sight. Reo wasn't complaining. Thanks to his Nen contracts, he could recover quickly without fear of lasting fatigue. But he was starting to worry Lena might actually wear herself out at this rate. 3 days after the fourth trial, the airship finally reached a large city and hovered above a towering building. Candidates, thank you for your patience. We are now arriving at the venue for the final phase of the Hunter exam. Please prepare for disembarkation. The announcement echoed throughout the ship. Reo and the others gathered in the lounge, waiting for Hunter Association staff to lead them off the airship. Soon after, they were escorted down and into a spacious field beside a luxury hotel. According to Claire, this hotel was owned by the Hunter Association and had been reserved entirely for the final exam. Wow! This bed is amazing. Leorio flopped down onto the mattress and groaned in delight. I knew the Hunter Association had money, but this is next level. Half an hour later, a loudspeaker summoned all candidates to the exam hall, located just below the rooftop field. The room was grand and open, and the examiners from all prior phases were already waiting inside. Behind Chairman Netero stood a large board, covered with a cloth. Lena, whose legs were still wobbling a bit thanks to Reo, looked around and muttered. So this is the final test, huh? Doesn't seem that mysterious anymore. Reo had already told her what to expect, so for her, the veil of suspense was gone. Leorio, however, was a bundle of nerves. Is this really it? I'm freaking out. He glanced at the lined-up examiners, his eyes falling on Chairman Netero and the mysterious covered board. The tension was palpable. The final test will be a one-on-one duel, Chairman Netero announced with a grin. Here are the matchups. With that, he dramatically yanked down the curtain, revealing the finalized bracket. Ugh! Leorio's face turned pale. The way the bracket was drawn, it looked like only one person would be left standing. Everyone stared in stunned silence, except Reo and Lena, who already knew what to expect. Wait. Does this mean only one person can pass the exam? Hanzo asked, his voice tight with disbelief. Netero let out a cryptic chuckle. Of course. He paused for dramatic effect. Not. All you have to do is win once to pass the final test. He burst into laughter, clearly enjoying himself. The room relaxed, slightly, as the candidates processed what that meant. Surprise gave way to cautious optimism. They still had to fight. But at least it wasn't a last man standing situation. Chapter 64. Of all the candidates, Leorio's reaction to the announcement was the most exaggerated. He jumped up in excitement, overwhelmed with joy. After all, this meant that only one person would ultimately fail the Hunter exam, which gave him a pretty solid shot at passing. If he succeeded, he could finally enroll in a medical university, tuition-free, and pursue his dream of becoming a doctor. But the thing that thrilled him the most was something Chairman Netero had said. In this test, the winner of each one-on-one duel will qualify immediately. The loser will then face the next challenger in the bracket. The last person to lose all their matches will be the only one disqualified. Leorio almost burst out laughing. As long as he didn't end up last in line, he could make it. And better yet, he'd seen the duel bracket, which gave him even more confidence. The matchups were divided into two groups, as shown on the bracket Netero had revealed. Group 1. Hanzo vs Gon. Loser of match 1 vs Ponzo. Loser of match 2 vs Killua. Loser of match 3 vs Jitaraker. Group 2. Reo vs Leorio. Loser of match 1 vs Hisoka. Loser of match 2 vs Kurapika. Loser of match 3 vs Bakukal. Loser of match 4 vs Lena. Loser of match 5 vs final loser of Group 1. Reo smiled confidently. His first match was against Reo, his friend. Whether he won or lost, he figured they could coordinate a little to make sure he passed. It's foolproof, he thought to himself, already imagining the moment he'd receive his hunter license. But while Reo was glowing with confidence, not everyone felt the same. Killua narrowed his eyes, clearly irritated. The format was anything but fair. Why is the order so unbalanced? The earlier fighters clearly have an advantage. He stepped forward and challenged Netero directly. Why this order? It seems completely arbitrary. Netero simply glanced at him, calm as ever. These matchups were based on your past performance throughout the exam. Candidates who performed well were given earlier opportunities, more chances to pass. Killua scowled, not satisfied. Can you explain how those performances were evaluated? Netero didn't answer directly, but instead offered a bit of insight into the scoring system. The evaluation is based on 3 major categories: physical ability, mental ability, and impression. That caught everyone's attention. Netero continued. Physical ability includes agility, flexibility, endurance, and sensory perception. Mental ability refers to stamina, adaptability, judgment, and imagination. The room was silent, processing the information. But most importantly, Netero added, is the impression score. That's the part that determines whether someone is truly qualified to be a hunter. As expected, Reo had already guessed this. The first 2 categories might be measurable, but the impression score was entirely subjective, and thus, the most influential. Killua's frustration visibly spiked. A vague category like impression determines everything? But Netero ignored the objection and continued smiling. Impression includes qualities that don't fit into statistics: your attitude, actions, judgment, and the sense you give off to us examiners. The room grew tense. Everyone started glancing toward Reo, Gon, Reo, and Hanzo, the 4 candidates likely to have scored the highest in Netero's personal judgment. Reo, trying to diffuse the sudden attention, gave a sheepish laugh. Hey, it's just luck. Pure luck, I swear. Everyone looked like they wanted to throttle him. Reo, on the other hand, stayed calm. He knew he'd performed well overall, maybe not flawlessly, but certainly with enough strategy and composure to earn solid marks. With the format explained, Gon raised his hand. What are the rules for the duels? Netero stroked his beard and replied with his usual amusement. It's simple. 1-on-1. No restrictions. You may use weapons. The tension in the room intensified. However, Netero added, his tone suddenly more serious. You may not kill your opponent. If you do, you will be disqualified immediately. A quiet murmur spread through the candidates. That restriction made things much more difficult. Everyone here was strong, capable of lethal force. Having to restrain oneself could be a major handicap. But Netero was unmoved. These are the rules. No exceptions. Seeing no further questions, Netero offered his final congratulations. Out of tens of thousands who applied, only 11 of you made it this far. You've overcome immense trials, and now, just one victory stands between you and your hunter license. I wish you all strength and success. Let the final test begin. A man in a black suit stepped forward. I will serve as the referee for the first round. My name is Louis. First match, Reo vs. Reo. Reo blinked in confusion. Wait. Me? First. I thought Hanzo and Gon were going first. But the schedule was clear, and the time had come. He reluctantly got to his feet. Reo, on the other hand, stood with quiet confidence. Ever since he saw the bracket, a bold idea had been forming in his mind. Chapter 65. Reo and Reo soon stepped onto the designated stage prepared for their duel. Louis, the referee, saw that both participants were ready and raised his hand. Ready. Begin. As soon as the words left Louis's mouth, Reo noticed Leorio's eyes twitching oddly, clearly trying to signal something. Then Leorio opened his mouth with a dramatic speech. Yo, Reo. You, me, Kurapika, and gone. We all started this exam together back on Whale Island. And now look at us, we've made it to the final test. But since fate brought us face to face, we can't pull any punches. Let's settle it like we did on the ship. Bring it on. He dramatically pulled out his small knife and assumed a fighting stance. Reo smiled. He remembered the uncertainty he felt after being transported into this world. And now, here he was, fighting in the final stage of the Hunter exam. To be honest, squaring off against Leorio almost felt unfair. Leorio, he said calmly, I never thought we'd all make it this far. But since we're here, let's finish strong. Do your best, this is how we make it all worth it. Reo gave a small, knowing smirk. There might just be a surprise in store. Leorio, across from him, laughed and nodded. Their journey had come full circle. Reo gestured politely. Go on, Leorio. Everyone's watching. Show us what you've got. Leorio grinned. Then I'm coming. Watch out. Bring it on. Leorio dashed forward with his knife, shouting to psych himself up. But the examiners watching the match already knew how this would go. From what they'd observed, Reo was equally adept at aggressive offense and patient counterattacks. His poise under pressure was exceptional. Swish. Leorio closed the distance, swinging his knife with impressive speed. Reo, however, simply stepped aside, avoiding it effortlessly. Still, Leorio didn't stop. He launched a flurry of strikes, trying to catch Reo off guard. Truth be told, Leorio's swordsmanship wasn't bad at all, easily above average for someone without formal training. But Reo was in a different league. In his previous life, Reo had fought in underground rings. He'd trained in dodging and countering under real pressure, and since arriving in this world, he'd gained even more agility thanks to his contract with the rabbit. In this arena, he thought, there's no one faster than me who hasn't mastered Nen. He sidestepped every blow with ease, watching calmly as Leorio grew increasingly exhausted. Huff. Huff. After a few minutes, Leorio's stamina had clearly taken a hit. He bent forward, panting. Man. Reo, you really are something. I didn't expect to win, but I thought I'd at least land a hit. Reo offered a faint, apologetic smile. All right, Leorio. That was just the warm-up. Now it's my turn, get ready. Leorio's eyes twitched again, as if trying to signal Reo once more. But Reo ignored it. He tapped his foot, vanishing from view in a blur, and appeared in front of Leorio almost instantly. He raised his right hand and aimed a palm strike, not with full force, but with just enough impact. Smack! His palm struck Leorio's chest, launching him across the arena. Bam! Leorio crashed into the wall with enough force to leave a person-shaped imprint. Several examiners had to duck out of the way. From his perch, Chairman Netero chuckled. Hey! Even though he held back, that still sent him flying. Candidate Leorio might not have the strength yet, but perhaps he's got potential elsewhere. Menki, arms crossed, scowled. Humph. That perv never had what it took to pass. I said it back in the second trial, he should have been eliminated. Satsuki nearby shrugged and tried to diffuse the tension. Well. He did make it to the final stage. The president must have seen something in him. On the battlefield, Reo looked toward the wall, where Leorio hadn't moved in a while. He signaled to Louis with his eyes. Louis took the cue and jogged over to check on Leorio. Candidate number 403, Leorio, is currently unconscious. However, since this test requires a clear concession from the losing party, the match is technically not over. I will now attempt to wake candidate Leorio. He reached out his hand toward Leorio's face, prepared to apply the ancient art of A humiliating slap. But before Louis could do anything, Reo spoke up, shocking everyone with what he said next. Hey hunters. Quick break again. Hopefully y'all are enjoying this fanfic. Let's dive back in. Chapter 66. Reo stepped forward and stopped Louis from proceeding, calmly saying something that left every candidate and examiner in shock. This duel. Leorio wins. You can announce it. Louis froze, confused, staring at Reo. Candidate number 406, Reo, what do you mean by that? Reo nodded firmly, eyes steady. I mean exactly what I said. I'm admitting defeat. Leorio wins this round. This time, Reo raised his voice enough that everyone present could hear it clearly. No way. What kind of idiot would throw away a guaranteed win like that? The loudest reaction came from Pengsi, much to Rio's non-surprise. Thinking back to her flustered reaction 2 days ago in his room, he figured this was par for the course. Why would Reo give up? He already won. If Leorio wakes up, he would have admitted defeat himself, right? Gon looked deeply confused, his usual innocent eyes now full of questions. Well Tilda, if it were me, Killua chimed in, hands behind his head, I'd probably do the same. I mean, this is the final test of the hunter exam. Ending it so easily would just be boring, don't you think? The examiners were equally stunned by the development. Even Louis, the referee, didn't know how to proceed and turned toward Chairman Netero for guidance. Ho 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 ho. Chairman Netero chuckled, stroking his beard before responding. Referee Louis, you may announce the result. Since candidate number 406, Reo, has admitted defeat, the winner of this match is candidate number 403, Leorio. Louis blinked, but nodded. He walked over to the unconscious Leorio, pulled him from the wall, and raised his hand. The first duel of the final test has concluded. Winner, candidate number 403, Leorio. The announcement was met not with cheers, but with silence and side eyes. Everyone had seen Leorio's obvious attempt to signal Reo before the match, and now all eyes fell on the man who lost Reo. He sighed, realizing that if he didn't say something, he was about to be socially executed. All right, I just thought winning this easily would be boring. Come on, I'm from the martial arts crowd, if I don't get a real fight in the final test, I'll feel like I wasted the whole experience. Can you blame me? His explanation was met with a room full of skeptical stares. Sigh. Tough crowd, Reo muttered, shrugging helplessly. But there was no time to dwell on it. Chairman Netero immediately moved things along. The first match is complete. Now, on to the second. Gon vs Hanzo. Reo stepped off the field and gave the stage to the next two competitors. Gon, who'd been watching from the sidelines, now stepped forward, nerves briefly surfacing. But the memory of the encouragement he received before leaving Whale Island grounded him, and the tension faded. Determination filled his gaze. The examiners watching the match exchanged murmurs. That kid is really going up against Hanzo? That's a pretty big gap in skill, Menki said, furrowing her brow. Hanzo's scores were higher across the board, added Satsuki. It's not just scores, Menki replied. Hanzo's actual combat ability is leagues ahead. Satsuki rubbed his chin and thought. Then again. Maybe it's that impression score the chairman mentioned. He's been unusually positive about Gon. Chairman Netero didn't say a word, just sat there smiling, stroking his beard. Hanzo, meanwhile, had turned to the referee, recognizing him. Oh, you're the guy who was following me during the fourth trial, right? The referee, Masters, blinked in surprise. So, you noticed? Of course. There was an examiner following each of us, wasn't there? Hanzo replied proudly. Bakukul and Pengsi, standing off to the side, glanced at each other in stunned silence. This was news to them. Hanzo turned back to Masters. Actually, I should thank you. Masters looked baffled. Why's that? Because your evaluations of me were so spot on. That's probably why I made it this far. Masters just stared at him, internally sighing, why is this guy still talking? But Hanzo suddenly grew serious, placing his hands on Master's shoulders. I want to confirm something. Why yeah? The match is won when the opponent concedes, right? No knockouts, no draws. That's correct. Why is he like this? Masters thought, trying to keep a straight face. Hanzo nodded and stepped toward Gon. The referee, clearly done with the chatter, waved them forward. The second match of the final test, candidate number 405, Gon, versus candidate number 294, Hanzo. Begin. And with that, the next showdown officially began. Chapter 67. As the referee announced the start of the duel, Gon kicked off and sprinted forward. Everyone saw Gon rush in one direction, but he quickly pivoted to the left, trying to create distance. However, despite Gon's early movement, Hanzo, one step behind, immediately caught up using his ninja speed and reappeared beside him. Realizing Hanzo had vanished from sight, Gon sensed something was wrong and instinctively dodged, sprinting up the wall with such agility it looked like he was running against gravity. But even then, he couldn't shake Hanzo. In a blink, Hanzo reappeared behind him again. Gon kicked off the wall, flipping in midair, but to his shock, Hanzo was once more right behind him, so close, he even had time to talk. So, you're confident in your legwork, huh? From the sidelines, Reo watched Hanzo appear in midair behind Gon. Considering Gon was already airborne, it only highlighted how overwhelming Hanzo's strength really was. From this alone, Reo judged that Hanzo might be stronger than he himself was. Of course, in terms of raw speed, Reo wasn't far behind. With his agility boost from the rabbit contract, Hanzo might not be able to keep up if it came down to footwork alone. Reo, who had just regained consciousness, also stared in awe at the two shadows streaking across the field, one green and one black. With his current strength, he could barely keep track of them. What? Gon's that strong? Then what about Reo? He turned toward Reo instinctively. Reo caught Leorio's glance and gave a small nod, silently confirming that he hadn't even gone all out during their match. Leorio gulped. He knew he was weak, but this was on a whole other level. On the field, Gon landed, only for Hanzo to appear next to him instantly. Gon immediately struck out with a kick, hoping to land a hit, but Hanzo casually leapt upward, landing on Gon's extended leg as if it were a perch. Still too slow, Hanzo muttered. On the sidelines, Bakaku and Ponzu were slack-jawed watching the fight. They couldn't believe how skilled both fighters were. Meanwhile, Lena, who stood beside Reo, looked contemplative. A couple of days ago, aboard the airship, Reo had advised her, if she were to face either Gon, Hanzo, or Hisoka, she should forfeit immediately. She hadn't understood why back then, but now, watching this clash, it was all too clear. On the field again, Hanzo's foot barely left Gon's leg before Gon twisted around to launch another strike. But before he could even extend his arm, Hanzo was already behind him and delivered a swift chop to Gon's neck. Gon's vision blurred as dizziness overwhelmed him. He collapsed to the ground. For a kid, you're impressive, Hanzo said quietly. Outside the ring, the other candidates stared with deep concern. Hanzo tried to get Gon to surrender, beating him repeatedly in hopes of forcing a concession, but Gon stubbornly refused to give up. Leorio, watching from the sidelines, turned away in anguish. Reo, who had known this moment was coming from the anime, found that seeing it in person was completely different. The brutality of it left him seething with anger. He wasn't alone. Many of the candidates and even the examiners were disturbed. Menki covered half her face and muttered to Satots beside her. Seriously, the chairman has the worst sense of judgment sometimes. We couldn't even endure this. If he could admit defeat so easily, he wouldn't have made it this far, Satots replied. But still, this is cruel. Chairman Netero remained stone-faced, eyes locked on the arena. Meanwhile, Gon continued enduring hit after hit. His vision began to blur, one of his ears stopped hearing, and blood pooled beneath him. Still, he didn't surrender. Hanzo turned to psychological tactics, trying to make Gon break emotionally instead of physically. But Gon's determination was unshakable. 3 hours passed. Reo and Kurapika stood in silence, watching Gon endure what no one else could. Leorio's fists were clenched. His face was dark with bruises, and he looked ready to jump in if not for the referee holding him back. Lena tugged on Rio's sleeve. Is that kid really holding on just to find his dad? Though Lena was normally reserved, she wasn't heartless. Seeing Gon's body abused for 3 straight hours awakened her compassion. From what she'd seen, Gon still had a good shot at passing. And in terms of raw ability, many of the remaining candidates probably weren't his equal. Even she had to admit, if Gon got close, she wouldn't last a second, even with a gun in hand. Chapter 68. Reo shook his head, watching Gon being relentlessly beaten by Hanzo in the ring. He spoke in a low voice. Maybe it's because he believes that if he admits defeat, he'll no longer be qualified to chase after that man. Or that he won't be able to face the expectations of the people who care about him. But in my eyes, a man who abandoned his child for over a decade to wander the world isn't qualified to be called a father. Of course, how Gon chooses to face his father in the end has nothing to do with us. All we can do now is pray for him. Unlike the stylized portrayal in the anime, watching 3 hours of brutal torture firsthand was a completely different experience for Reo. No matter how realistic the animation, it was still just fiction. But here, standing in the flesh, watching real blood spill, it left Reo at a loss for words. Everyone's emotions had been pushed to the brink, pressure mounting with every moment. But then, laughter burst from the crowd at the sudden absurdity on stage. Hanzo crouched low, resting one hand on the ground as he introduced himself. We ninjas begin rigorous training from the womb. I've endured trials beyond your wildest imagination. I've been alive for 18 years. And for all 18 of them, I've never stopped training my body. I've killed more people by your age than you can imagine. You don't stand a chance. As he spoke, Hanzo shifted his weight, balancing on a single index finger. I'm not saying this to be cruel. Just admit defeat. Say it, and this ends. But just as the words left his mouth, Gon kicked his hand out from under him. Yeah. Hanzo spun through the air and slammed face first into the arena floor. Reo cracked a grin. Leorio, already awake, completely lost it, tipping his head back and howling with laughter. Nice. Gon. Kick him again. Get him in the face. In the teeth. Finish him. Even the examiners chuckled at the unexpected twist. A moment later, Hanzo stood up, trying to recover his dignity as blood trickled from his nose. That kick? I let you land it. Leorio didn't hesitate to shout. Liar. Your nose says otherwise. Hanzo groaned and tried to ignore him, wiping his face as he pulled a short sword from his sleeve and pointed it at Gon. This time, I'm not talking about a broken arm. I'll make sure you never walk again. You'll be left with an unhealable wound, and if you're not careful, you might even bleed out. I'm begging you. Just surrender. Gon stared back, unwavering. I don't want to lose a leg either. But what I hate even more is giving up. So let's find a different way to settle this. Hanzo's frustration boiled over. I'm serious. I'll do it. I'm still not giving in. And if I die, you'll lose anyway. A tense silence fell. Hanzo clenched his teeth and lightly tapped Gon on the forehead with the flat of his blade. You don't get it. If you die, none of this matters. You can't take the exam again next year. Still, Gon didn't flinch. He stared straight at Hanzo. I want to find my dad. Because he's a hunter. Even if he's far away now, I believe we'll meet someday. But if I give up here, I don't think I'll ever see him. So I won't quit. Hanzo's fierce expression faltered. He shut his eyes, suppressing emotion. Then your hunter exam ends here. As Hanzo raised his weapon again, Gon didn't even move. He looked death in the face without a hint of hesitation. Then Hanzo lowered the blade. I admit defeat. I lose. Everyone in the room was stunned. As Hanzo turned to walk away, Gon called out after him. Hey, wait. That's not fair. You can't just give up like that. We were still fighting. Hanzo's steps stopped. His temple twitched, veins popping with frustration. If I'm going to lose, I at least want to find a way to make it respectable. Gon beamed with satisfaction. But before he could say more, wham! Hanzo hit Gon with an uppercut, knocking him out cold. He walked off the field and told the referee to declare Gon the winner. Before leaving entirely, he turned to President Netero. Make sure the kid understands he passed. It's your job to explain it. Killua caught up to Hanzo on his way out and asked why he forfeited. After all, ninjas were known for being ruthless. He could have just threatened Gon's friends and forced a surrender. The other candidates looked on, curiosity and confusion all over their faces. Chapter 69. Hanzo noticed all eyes on him and sighed before explaining to the group. When I torture my enemies, I always prepare for the possibility that they'll hate me for the rest of their lives. People who are tortured, their eyes change. They show defiance. Even someone trained to hide it can't completely mask their intent or malice. But Gon, his eyes held no hatred. No killing intent, either. Can you believe it? Even after I broke his arm, there wasn't the slightest trace of hate in his gaze. It disarmed me. His spirit wore me down, and in the end, I forfeited. And so, the second match of the final phase of the Hunter exam concluded with a winner, Gon Freaks. With the duel between Gon and Hanzo over, the next match was set, Reo vs Hisoka. Truthfully, Reo knew that facing Hisoka at his current level, especially without access to Nen, would be difficult. If he could use Nen, maybe things would be different, but now, he'd have to rely purely on physical ability and instinct. A moment later, after Gon was carried out of the arena unconscious, the referee, Masters, returned and announced. Next match in the final test, Candidate 406, Reo, versus Candidate 44, Hisoka. Reo and Hisoka stepped onto the battlefield. At the referee's signal, they stood a single arm's length apart. Leorio watched from the sidelines, tense. This one's going to be intense. Kurapika nodded. If it comes to hand-to-hand combat, Reo has the upper hand. But how he handles Hisoka's cards, that's going to be the challenge. In the ring, Reo stared down Hisoka. He tensed his muscles, his whole body coiling like a spring. His aura sharpened, though not Nen, the raw fighting spirit was enough to create pressure. Hisoka, meanwhile, looked Reo up and down with a leering grin. On such ripe and growing fruit, how tempting, but no, not yet. I must wait. When the flavor is at its peak, that's when I'll devour you. All the anticipation. Begin. At the referee's signal, Reo launched himself forward. A quick jab, Reo dropped low, twisting his hip and shoulder, using raw explosive power to strike straight at Hisoka. Clang. The punch was intercepted, not by Hisoka's hand, but by a playing card. Somehow, it rang out like metal on metal. Rio's expression didn't change. He followed up with a barrage of strikes, fast, clean, brutal. His fists blurred into afterimages. But every punch was blocked, Hisoka deflecting them lazily with cards, as if swatting away mosquitoes. Frowning, Reo twisted into a side kick, aiming at Hisoka's ribs. Hisoka, of course, dodged cleanly and countered with a slash from one of his cards. Reo blocked with his shin, crack, blood sprayed. Though the cut was shallow, it was clean. Hisoka's cards weren't just props, they were weapons. Reo retreated quickly, ignoring the pain. But before he could reposition, HxH vanished. Instinct kicking in, Reo slammed an elbow backward, thud. It connected, but not against something solid. That might work on others, HxH's voice whispered from behind, but not on me. A hand reached forward to grab Reo. Behind me. Reo shifted left just in time, boom. A crater formed where he just stood. He skidded low across the floor, one leg bent under him, his eyes calm and calculating. In less than 5 seconds, the two had clashed a half-dozen times. Slightly breathless, HxH opened his eyes fully for the first time and licked his lips. Impressive. He's holding up this well without even using Nen. If he did know how to use it. Reo didn't care what HxH was thinking. He just saw an opening. His right hand tensed, fingers curled like claws, veins bulging with pressure. His whole body flexed like a coiled spring. Then, boom. He slammed his feet into the floor, sending cracks racing across the arena. With a blast of force, he shot forward like a cannonball. HxH's eyes widened slightly, snapped out of his reverie. He raised a playing card in defense as Reo closed the distance. And the real fight began. Chapter 70. Reo knew that the loud impact would definitely catch HxH's attention. The moment he closed the distance, he grabbed HxH's right arm with his left hand and brought his sharpened, slender right hand down toward HxH's chest. Clang. It felt like slamming into steel. A sharp metallic clang rang out. Reo immediately released HxH's arm and leapt back to dodge a card slash from HxH's left hand, widening the gap between them. Killua and Jatarakar, watching from outside the arena, both widened their eyes. The ability to alter the structure of one's hands, it wasn't particularly flashy, but it was a classic assassination technique used by the Zoldyck family. That someone outside their lineage had mastered it was astonishing. But that didn't matter now. Reo and HxH were still locked in their duel. Rio's eyes flicked toward the shattered floor HxH had struck earlier. That one casual blow had left a crater, it gave him a rough measure of HxH's destructive power. Swish. Swish. 2 cards flew toward Reo. He rolled to the side to evade them, only to realize that the real threat was hidden behind them. Boom. The ground exploded beneath HxH's kick, sending shards flying. Dust and rubble clouded the area as Reo was forced to dive away. But HxH wasn't letting up. He appeared before Reo in an instant and drove a kick straight into his stomach. Gah! Reo was launched across the arena like a rag doll, smashing into the wall. Cracks splintered outward as debris rained down, and a plume of dust obscured him from view. Pain burned through Rio's abdomen. Blood rushed up his throat, and he spat it out. But that seemed to relieve some pressure, dulling the pain slightly. Still staggering, Reo wiped the blood from his lips. A grin stretched across his face despite the agony. He hadn't had a real fight like this in a long time, and he welcomed it. Forget the exam. Right now, this battle with HxH was all that mattered. Swish. Reo launched himself forward, his footfalls nearly silent as he burst through the lingering dust. There he was, HxH's shadowy figure loomed ahead. Bang bang bang. Reo didn't bother with technique. This was a fight between men. Fists and fury. HxH met him blow for blow, no longer using his cards. It was pure hand-to-hand combat. A kick for a punch, a strike for a counter. The audience could hardly believe what they were seeing. Breathing heavily, Reo glared across at HxH, his face swollen, lips split. HxH's nose was bleeding, his posture wobbling, his pupils beginning to roll back in ecstasy. Crack. Suddenly, HxH vanished, and pain exploded in Rio's left arm. Thunk. A severed limb hit the ground. Rio's eyes widened in disbelief. His entire left arm, gone. Blood gushed freely from the smooth, exposed stump. Leo, watching from outside the ring, couldn't believe it. Our Rio's arm? The severed limb still twitched on the floor. Kurapika stared, unable to process what he was seeing. Rio's entire fighting style relied on both hands. This changed everything. Lina and Ponzu gasped and covered their mouths, too stunned to speak. Meanwhile, the examiners were deadly serious. Even Chairman Netero's usual calm had faded. "Chairman, that's a Nen technique. Allowing someone like Hisaka to participate is grossly unfair to the others," Menki snapped. Satsuki agreed, arms crossed. Even among the examiners, Hisaka is on another level. And he's using Hatsu, his bungee gum or something similar. Chairman Netero nodded thoughtfully. Indeed. We've had Nen users in the past, but usually at a rudimentary level. There was that boy from Whale Island nearly 20 years ago, he faced someone with early Nen. He managed to win, but this is different. This wasn't just talent. Hisaka had long since mastered his Nen. Back on the field, Hisaka's body twisted grotesquely. His upper torso leaned back unnaturally, while one hand traced along his own face and the other clutched a bloody playing card he licked with delight. A cold chill swept over Reo. If the Hisaka he'd fought up to now was manageable, this version was monstrous. Then Hisaka's eyes snapped open. Swish. Reo dove right. Boom. 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 Several cards embedded into the wall behind him and exploded, leaving small craters and filling the air with dust and debris. Chapter 71. Reo didn't bother paying attention to the burning sensation on his back. His eyes were locked on the twisted figure in the distance. With only half of his strength left, the odds of winning against this monster, Hisaka, were growing slimmer by the second. He could surrender, of course. But conceding in a fight like this, that wasn't Rio's style. Determined, Reo pushed forward, sprinting toward Hisaka to close the distance and stop the relentless barrage of playing cards. But before he could get close, a gust of wind shot toward him. Reo was forced to dodge sideways. Boom. A card embedded itself in the ground where Reo had just stood, carving a deep pit in the floor. He took a sharp breath. Hisaka had clearly lost most of his rationality, but if Reo could just close in, he might still stand a chance. Gritting his teeth, he decided to press forward, no matter what. 5 meters. Reo kept moving, shielding his head with his right arm as a card exploded against it, tearing into his flesh. 3 meters. Another card flew straight for his abdomen. Reo couldn't even see it properly, he simply reacted, blocking with his leg. 1 meter. He was finally within striking range. Bloodied but undeterred, Reo launched himself forward, his right hand raised to shield himself and his remaining strength surging into one last flying knee. "This is it. Eat this," he roared, his voice filled with defiance, rage, and desperation. Everyone watching knew, this was Rio's final move, his strongest attack, his last shot at victory. He flew through the air like time had slowed, his knee aimed right at Hisaka's face. Peng! His knee smashed against Hisaka's face. Boom! Both of them flew across the venue, crashing violently into a wall. The impact stirred up a dense cloud of smoke and dust. When the air cleared, Rio's unconscious body was still upright, knee against Hisaka's face. Neither moved. Referee Masters hesitated, unsure how to handle this bizarre stalemate, and turned toward President Netero for guidance. Netero sighed. He hadn't expected the match to end like this. Just as he was about to declare the result. Snap! Reo was shoved aside. Hisaka stood up slowly, blood streaming from his face. He licked it, smiling in that eerie, perverse way only he could manage. Hoo-hoo-hoo. Ha 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 ha. Hisaka cackled, then muttered to himself. That was delightful. You've ripened nicely. But this isn't the time to pick you. Next time. Yes. Next time, I'll savor you properly. Then he looked to the referee. I forfeit. Silence. Everyone in the hall froze. He'd just maimed his opponent, Reo had lost an arm, and now he was admitting defeat. Leorio clenched his fists and took a step forward, fury boiling in his chest, but Kurapika held him back with a steady hand and calm eyes. Humph! Leorio could only grit his teeth and growl. Masters blinked, then slowly raised his hand. In the second duel of Group 2, Candidate 406, Reo, is declared the winner. Before the words even finished echoing through the hall, a blur rushed across the venue. It was Lena. She dropped to her knees beside Reo, clutching him in her arms, her expression pale with worry. What she didn't see was Pengsi taking a hesitant step forward too, only to stop herself the moment she saw Lena run to Reo first. "Where's the medical team?" Lena shouted. "Do you plan to watch him bleed to death? Get over here." A group of white uniformed medics scrambled forward, gently placing Reo on a stretcher and preparing to move him. Boom! Just then, a violent shockwave exploded outward from Rio's unconscious body. Wind ripped through the hall. The aura around him was wild, chaotic, forcing everyone to raise their arms to shield themselves. Even Hisoka, standing nearby, had his already tattered clothes shredded further by the storm. Damn! What's going on now? Leorio struggled against the wind, yelling over the roaring gale. "Kurapika, what is this?" "I don't know," Kurapika replied grimly. "But look at the examiners. All of them, Menki, Satots, Buara, were deadly serious. Even Netero, who always wore a smile, now wore a solemn expression. Killua stood nearby, his face shadowed. "TCH. It feels just like him," he muttered. "This kind of aura, like Illumi's." Chapter 72. Time rewinds to just 1 minute earlier. Reo was lying on the stretcher when he began to feel it. Every bone in his body felt like it was cracking, and a heart-wrenching pain surged through him. That playing card. Was that Nen? So this is Nen. This is what it feels like. I've awakened Nen. At that moment, powerful aura erupted from Rio's 10 essence points. Buzz buzz buzz. Streams of transparent aura burst from his body, surging wildly outward. Simultaneously, a book materialized in Rio's hand, cloaked in pitch-black mist that radiated a crushing, ominous pressure. In an instant, the aura around Reo, once transparent and colorless, was soaked in that darkness and turned deep, pitch-black. The oppressive aura kept pouring out of him, flooding the venue like a storm. Such a sinister aura. "It's hard to believe," Sasi muttered, instinctively backing away. Menki and the other examiners were equally stunned. This oppressive Nen aura, more powerful than many of their own after years of training, was now being released by a candidate who had just awakened. "This is bad. Everyone, evacuate the candidates immediately," President Netero barked. Before anyone could move, Rio's overflowing aura had already reached Kurapika and the others. Bang! In that critical moment, Netero stepped forward, planting a foot down to appear in front of the group. With a single hand raised, he formed a massive barrier of Nen to shield the others. "Take them and go," he commanded. The stunned examiners finally snapped out of their trance. Sasi, Menki, and others sprang into action, each grabbing 2 candidates and fleeing toward the exit. Blocked by Netero's aura shield, Rio's Nen had no choice but to surge outwards in other directions. Boom! The walls buckled under the pressure of Rio's Nen and then shattered completely. Far from the battlefield, the remaining candidates looked back in disbelief. Mr. Sasi, what's happening to Reo?" Leorio asked, wide-eyed. Sasi, though visibly unsettled, replied with restraint. "Candidate 406, Reo, just awakened his Nen. It's just a bit extreme." Leorio wanted to probe further, but fell silent under the weight of the other examiners' glares. Lena stood silently with the group, holding Rio's broken arm, her gaze fixed on the shattered hall. Meanwhile, Hisoka, twisting his body in a grotesque rhythm, explained with his usual eerie tone. Ah, that was Nen. I used my aura blasted into him by accident and helped him burst open his aura nodes. Now the fruit is ripening. I can't wait for the harvest. Delectable. Though the others could barely understand his words, Hisoka clearly grasped what was happening. Menki, on the other hand, spat in disgust. This much aura. Even Bura and I couldn't generate it together. Just what kind of monster is this kid supposed to be? She glanced back toward the hall, worried for Reo. And at this rate, if he keeps leaking Nen like that, his body won't survive it. Inside the room, Netero frowned as he faced the now devastated arena floor. Where Reo had once stood, the tiles were dust. Each of Netero's steps left a fresh indent in the pulverized ground. Drink! Netero shouted, sending a jolt of Nen directly into Rio's mind. Rio's eyes snapped open. His aura halted its wild surge and retracted back into his body. He quickly stabilized himself, clamping down on the Nen within. He had been conscious of his uncontrolled outflow but hadn't been able to stop it, until now. Netero's eyes widened, impressed. He used Zetsu. Instinctively. Without being taught. This kid might change everything. Reo stood up, rotating his shoulders. Aside from his missing arm, his body felt healed. No bruises. No pain. Only fatigue. Yo, Chairman, seriously, thank you. I was dead meat if not for you. Netero smiled lightly. As chairman of the Hunter Exam Committee, this is my job. And congratulations, Candidate 406, Reo. You've officially passed the Hunter exam. But inwardly, Netero mused. How can someone with such peaceful eyes unleash such terrifying darkness? Is this another monster? Reo had no idea what Netero was thinking, nor would he have cared. Chairman, the next test. Before he could finish, Reo collapsed once more. Despite his physical recovery, the massive drain on his aura and his spirit had taken a toll. He had reached his limit. Hey! Kid passed out again. Figures. Netero casually lifted Reo into his arms and headed for the door. Outside, everyone turned when they saw the chairman emerge, holding Reo. They stared, examiner and candidate alike. How had that overwhelming power just vanished? Lena and Kurapika stepped forward to check on Reo. Upon seeing that his wounds had vanished, aside from the missing arm, they breathed a sigh of relief. The medical team quickly moved in to examine him. Candidate 406 is stable, the lead medic confirmed. Aside from the severed arm, his body is uninjured. With that reassurance, the group finally relaxed. Reo was taken to the ward to rest. Though his body had healed, his spirit needed time to recover, and Nen recovery was no simple matter. Before the medical team departed, they carefully collected Rio's severed arm from Lena. Chapter 73. When Reo woke up again, it was already 10 days later, and he couldn't help feeling a bit distressed. What? You're saying I slept for 10 days straight? What about the Hunter exam? Reo stared in disbelief at Menki standing near his bed. In his last memory, he was still in the middle of the exam, facing off against Hisoka, no less. How had so much time passed? That's right, you slept for 10 whole days. Honestly, I was starting to wonder if you turned into a vegetable. If the doctors hadn't confirmed you were just asleep, I might have believed it. Menki tilted her head, gazing at Reo curiously. She'd never seen anyone sleep so long unless they were in a coma. But Reo hadn't been injured in a traditional sense, he was just out cold, deeply asleep. You have no idea, at one point even the medical team thought something was seriously wrong with you. But all the tests came back fine. She laughed at the memory, clearly amused, while Reo groaned and rubbed his temple. Well, whatever happened, I doubt it was a good thing. He gave up on understanding the mystery of his extended nap. It wasn't worth stressing over. So, if it's been 10 days, I assume the Hunter exam's over? What happened with the results? Reo was curious, especially since his presence had already changed several key events in the timeline. He didn't expect the outcome to match the original. Minky grinned mischievously, like she was about to deliver the punchline to a joke. Well, since only one person failed the final trial, 10 new hunters joined the association this year. She leaned in, her voice dropping conspiratorially. Wanna guess who didn't make it? I promise you won't believe it. Reo raised an eyebrow. He already had a pretty solid idea, based on the source material. Still, with that kind of setup, he humored her. I'm guessing. Killua? He sounded almost too confident. After all, he'd seen the anime, how could he forget that twist? Minky blinked. Wait, you really guessed Killua? Wow. I didn't expect that from someone who's actually friends with him. Then she smirked. You guys have been tight since the first phase, and you're throwing him under the bus. Ruthless. Reo froze. So it wasn't Killua? He knew he'd misjudged when Menki's smirk grew wider. Nice try, but nope. Not even close. Let me explain what happened over the past 10 days. She slid into the chair next to his bed. Your fight with Hisoka ended with Hisoka surrendering. You were declared the winner and officially passed. Reo nodded slowly. That much, at least, he remembered, vaguely. After your match, the final phase of the exam was postponed by a day, then resumed. That caught his attention. In the original story, the matches all took place over 2 days. Why the delay? Minky must have noticed his confusion and gave his shoulder a firm pat. Ow. Reo flinched. Crap, I forgot you only have one arm now. He looked at his empty left sleeve and gave a dry chuckle. Yeah. Guess I'm a one-armed guy now. Seeing the resigned expression on his face, Menki's heart twinged. Impulsively, she pulled him into a tight hug, pressing his head straight into her chest. Wah. Reo flailed uselessly. Reo, losing an arm isn't the end of the world. This is the world of hunters, we've seen stranger things than limb regeneration. You'll be okay. Someone will help fix it. Don't let this get you down. Still suffocating in what could only be described as a facial cleanse, Reo flailed even harder. Ahem. Cough. A cough came from the door. Puh. Reo yanked his face free and gasped for air, eyes widening at the sight. President Nitro? Menki froze. Her face flushed crimson as she realized what the old man had just walked in on. Mama, looks like I arrived at a very interesting time, Menki-chan. Menki quickly recoiled like a startled bird, suddenly acting nothing like the bold woman from seconds before. President Netero gave his usual hearty chuckle. Ho 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 ho. Still gasping, Reo turned to the guild leader with narrowed eyes. President, what brings you here? Netero chuckled again and stepped into the room. I came to check in on the little troublemaker who shook the whole association. Reo blinked. Troublemaker? All I did was awaken my nen. That's hardly a crime, is it? Netero just grinned wider. Ho ho, you'll see soon enough. Chapter 74. Reo looked at Chairman Netero with a puzzled expression. What do you mean I caused big trouble? Netero squinted his eyes with a sigh and explained, it's not that awakening your nen was the issue, it's the scale of your aura. The sheer amount of nen you released caused quite a bit of damage to the building. But never mind that now. He walked over to Rio's side, picked up a cup, dropped in a tea leaf, and handed it to him. Reo stared at the cup in confusion. Chairman. You gave me cold water with tea leaves in it. You expect me to drink this? Menki, who was sitting on Rio's left, shot him a sharp glance. He's not making tea, idiot. That's the Mizukan, water divination. It's a test to determine your nen category. Reo smacked his forehead with his remaining right hand. Right, Mizukan. Can't believe I forgot that. Fortunately, they all thought he was just a clueless newbie, so he decided to play along. Ah, water divination? Never heard of it, Menki-sensei, could you explain it to me? Before she could respond, Chairman Netero stepped in. Allow me. He pulled out a whiteboard from behind him and propped it up across from Reo. Mizukin is a method developed through Shingen Ryu to determine a person's nen affinity. You fill a glass with water, place a leaf on top, and focus your aura into the water. The changes that happen will indicate which of the 6 categories you belong to. He pointed to the 6 divisions on the chart. Enhancement, emission, manipulation, transmutation, conjuration, specialization. Depending on the result, you'll get one of these effects, Netero continued. Enhancement, water overflows. Emission, water changes color. Manipulation, the leaf moves. Transmutation, water changes taste. Conjuration, impurities or sediment appear. Specialization, anything not listed above. Once you know your type, you'll want to focus primarily on developing that category. You can still learn adjacent types on the hex chart at 80% efficiency, but going across to the opposite category will drop you to around 40% power. After the explanation, Netero gestured. Alright, let's test yours. Place your hands around the cup and release your aura. I'm guessing you're an enhancer, he added with a grin. Most martial artists are. Reo nodded and placed his hand on the cup. He focused his aura through his right hand, and a dark, intense flow of nen enveloped the cup. Netero frowned. The water in the cup started to change. Dark, crystal-like particles began forming in the liquid. Minky leaned forward. That's conjuration. Reo raised an eyebrow. So I'm a conjurer, huh? That's a bit unexpected. Netero chuckled. Not what I guessed, but conjurers can be very powerful if developed well. Reo frowned slightly, remembering that most of the strongest characters from the original story were specialists. Man. I was hoping for specialization. Krilo, Neferpito, even Murium, trait-type users are monsters. Still, he glanced at his contractor's notebook, his mysterious book ability, and made a mental note to test it later. If others couldn't see it, that would make it a specialist ability. Sensing his disappointment, Netero offered, if you're disappointed, don't be. Conjuration is a powerful type. And you can still train in transmutation too, it's adjacent, so you'll retain about 80% effectiveness. Reo gave a small grin. Yeah, you're right. I already have a few ideas for conjured items anyway. Netero laughed. That's the spirit. Master your own type, and build from there. Chapter 75. After President Netero finished introducing the 6 nen categories to Reo, he checked his watch and spoke. Alright, I've introduced you to the basics of nen. The rest is up to your instructor now, I'm off. Hi-yo yo. With that, Netero turned, stroked his beard, and left, as if he had other pressing matters to attend to. Take care, President, Reo and Menki said in unison, watching him go. Once Netero was completely out of sight, Menki visibly relaxed, letting go of her rigid posture and collapsing back onto Rio's hospital bed. By the way, ever since the second phase of the Hunter exam, I noticed you seem really intimidated by the chairman, Reo teased, glancing over at her. Menki sat up and gave him a look, clearly not amused by the observation. Well, of course I am. He's the chairman of the Hunter Association, one of the strongest people alive. She followed up with a wistful sigh. I wonder when my abilities will be that strong. Reo chuckled and said nothing. As a newcomer, he didn't feel qualified to comment on Menki's progress. Still, what the chairman said about assigning him an instructor piqued Rio's curiosity. And who better to ask than the pro-hunter sitting beside him? Hey, Menki, do you know who the association assigned to be my instructor? Menki gave Reo a side glance, then pouted without answering. Seeing her reaction, a thought popped into Rio's head. Could his instructor be her? Wait, don't tell me. You're my instructor? Menki's head flared with a cartoonish hash symbol. She clenched her fist and slammed it into his chest. Ow! Reo winced and looked down, realizing his left shoulder was still empty. No wonder it felt strange. Oh, right. I forgot I'm one-armed now. He looked at the limp, empty sleeve of his hospital gown and sighed. A pang of sympathy crossed Menki's face as she stared at the younger boy in front of her. Without thinking twice, she pulled him into a hug, mushing his face into her chest. Wait. Reo was still processing his one-armed status when he suddenly found himself engulfed by a surprise Menki hug. Oblivious to Rio's muffled protests, she softly said, "Reo. Losing an arm isn't the end of the world. Nen is such a mysterious power, there's bound to be someone out there who can help you fix it. So don't dwell on it too much, alright? MMBLGH." Reo, still smothered, could only make pitiful noises. Ahem. Cough. A polite but pointed cough came from the door, breaking the moment. Pwah. Reo yanked his face out of the facial cleanse and gasped for air. President Netero? Menki sat up straight, flustered. Wah, President? Netero stood at the doorway with a bemused grin. Mama, looks like I walked in at the wrong time, Menki-chan. Menki's face flushed a deep red as she shrank into herself, suddenly much less bold than usual. Ho 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 ho. Netero chuckled heartily, clearly enjoying the sight. Reo, meanwhile, had barely recovered from the sudden face washing. After a moment, he turned back to Netero. President, are you here to tell me something? Ho ho ho, just here to check in on the little troublemaker who almost blew up a whole testing facility. Huh? Reo blinked, confused. I caused that much damage? You didn't just awaken your Nen, Netero said, stroking his beard, you blew the roof off with it. That volume of raw aura. You're lucky we didn't have to rebuild the entire floor. Reo scratched his cheek awkwardly. I guess I did overdo it. Netero laughed again and waved a hand. No worries. I just came to see how you were doing. As of now, you've officially passed the Hunter exam. Welcome to the Hunter Association. Rio's eyes lit up. For real? Of course. You're now a licensed pro hunter. Congratulations. After Netero left again, Menki smirked. Well? You've got a long way to go now, student. Ready to be trained by yours truly? Reo groaned. You're really gonna make me call you sensei, aren't you? You bet your one arm I am.